21st, the full board voted unanimously not to have an IHO for the period of July 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025. So I'm just wondering, what is the reason to revisit a unanimous decision of the full board that occurred less than 2 months ago? And then I have one other question after that.
Certainly. After reviewing the school perceptions comments from our staff members and seeing the issue of discipline and behavior being a consistent theme throughout some of those responses, and understanding the greater scope of the other challenges the district is now facing that the board also needs to be involved in, and other issues working on. I wanted to bring this back for discussion, and that is why we have the B and C.
Perfect. I just wanted clarification on that potential change in precedent. And then my question on item 6, consent agenda. On July 3rd, Policy Chair Nichols and Board Member Hankins, with encouragement from Board President Johnson, voted to move a proposed policy on gender language on to the full board. And it's unclear to me why that policy does not appear on this evening's agenda. I think it's worth noting that item 2A on the July 3rd policy agenda listed, and I quote, gender language pronouns use discussion, no policy. But a surprise policy without input from the administration was introduced by the policy chair. So again, my question is, why does that policy not appear under the consent agenda tonight, which is the normal cadence for policy approval?
That was a suggestion, not a full written out, prepared for board approval policy. And we have several other items that are going to require much time tonight. It was not appropriate in the first place for it to come back to the board. That issue has already been at the board and returned back to the policy committee.
And maybe we table this until we put it as an item on the agenda for discussion, but the issue has not been to the full board. It was my understanding from policy that we would have this as a discussion item for the full board, and the full board would direct the policy committee of the consensus of the board, so we weren't doing unnecessary work. For example, a committee of 3 comes up with a policy that's then not approved by the full board. If the full board weighs in on the will of the board and directs the policy committee, we could potentially save time. And I would push back slightly. It was a policy that was written out and submitted to the policy committee. I believe the motion was to pass it on to the full board, and again, had not been reviewed by administration. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. I believe it was the January committee, or I'm sorry, the January board meeting where we did actually have that at the full board. Can I get an approval now for the agenda?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the agenda, but also by moving 5 to 4 and 4 to 5.
Okay, we have a motion of the approval of the agenda, changing items, the arrangement of items 4 and 5 by Brian Nichols. Is there a second?
I second.
Seconded by Tom Hankins. All in favor?
Yeah, call for discussion if there's any.
Oh, I'm sorry. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to item 1D, Pledge of Allegiance. Tonight we have the pleasure of having Ms. Malott the Converse Elementary principal to introduce Eugene.
Good evening. I have Eugene Lamont here with us. He'll be saying the Pledge of Allegiance. He's from Converse School. Ready? Okay, stand up here. Ready? Go ahead.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. What a wonderful job. Our next item is upcoming events. Board Member Clerk Tom Hankins.
I'm ready tonight. Good evening. There are several events coming up in the district for our students and parents of students and anybody interested. The district has done a wonderful job of doing these events during the summer for all of us to keep involved. Fruzen is hosting movie night at the Classic Cinemas on July 23rd at 5 p.m. Then on August 1st at 12 noon, BLA is hosting Summer Fun. Several things are happening on August 2nd. At noon, Gaston is hosting games. 1 p.m., Robinson is hosting movie night. 4 p.m., the same August 2nd, Hackett is hosting popsicle games and prizes. Not to be outdone, Commerce is having outdoor games on August 8th at 5 p.m. 4 of our high school graduates, Jocelyn, Fatima, Lonnie, and Gabby, have been selected to have their artwork displayed at the Her Art exhibition hosted at the Overture Center for the Arts in Madison from September to November 2024. To learn more about her art and the artists, go to herartexhibit.org. Again, that's herartexhibit.org. And this concludes the July 16th announcements.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hankins. Our next item up is public comment. Ms. Shope, do we have any public comments in person or online?
Yes, we have both. We have several here in the room, and I have, I believe, just one online.
Okay.
Board President Johnson,
Yes,
could
sir.
I have a moment of personal preference?
Certainly.
Okay. I do want to apologize to you and to the other members of the Business Operations and Finance Committee, as I was mistaken during our meetings last week when I stated that as an ex officio member that you had voice without vote. Dr. Garrison did remind me that that was incorrect, and as I went back and looked at the policy, it is clear that in policy 185, it says that as ex officio, the board president may participate and vote in committee meetings, but the president's presence does not count towards a quorum. So our policy does give you vote. So I apologize for that mistake.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. I accept your apology, and I have to tell you, it means a great deal to me. Thank you. Ms. Shope, I will read our policy, public participation. Speakers will be announced and invited to the podium by the board secretary. Each person will be allowed up to 3 minutes to speak. Should the individual require translation assistance, a translator may be of the individual's choosing or one provided by the district. Public comments requiring translations will be given 6 minutes. An individual's 3 minutes may be yielded to another individual. However, each person must complete a public comment card, indicate if speaking or yielding time, give the public comment card to the board secretary, and approach the microphone to state their first name and that the 3 minutes are being yielded to another individual. An individual may speak on behalf of a group. However, no more than 2 other people may yield their time to any one speaker. Individuals wishing to comment are expected to comply with the following norms in order to maintain a respectful and orderly meeting and to prevent discussion of confidential matters in a public forum. Comments should be directed to members of the Board of Education and not district employees, students, or other members of the public in attendance at the meeting. Signage, banners, or other materials which impedes any person's view of the proceedings shall be relocated. Speech that is belligerent, disorderly, disruptive, repetitive, or which exceeds the allowable time permitted for each speaker is prohibited. Concerns or questions that entail the disclosure of identifying information regarding specific students are prohibited. Response from the board, if any, will be limited to clarifying inaccurate information, seeking additional information from the speaker, or acknowledging that the speaker has been understood. The board will not debate with an individual, and the board may not take action on an item raised during public comment that is not on the meeting notice or agenda. The chair will interrupt and rule an individual who violates any of these norms out of order. If ruled out of order by the chair, the individual's opportunity to address the board will end immediately and the microphone will be turned off. Thank you for your participation and courtesy. Ms. Schopp.
Do you want to start in the room, or do you want me to read the one? Okay. So the first person I have is James.
President Tia Johnson, Vice President Brian Nichols, and Beloit School Board members. My name is James Simmons, a lifelong resident of Beloit, Wisconsin, and a proud graduate of Beloit Memorial High School, as evidenced by my tassel. I appeared before the school board 1 year ago to bring the story of the family's beloved Johnny Watts to your attention. February of this year, the WIAA did a feature story about the family's beloved Johnny on their website during Black History Month. They led the story of Johnny with 2 words: trailblazer, athlete. As this indicates, Johnny was much more than an outstanding athlete. When I started this process almost 2.5 years ago, I learned more about this remarkable story of the man whose story, as many people have mentioned, reads like a Hollywood script. When I first met with the family, the one question they asked me when we sat down was, "Why are you doing this?" They have treasured Johnny's Beloit High School career for almost 100 years, and they thought it would just be a Thanksgiving Day story. But they knew how they wanted the story of their beloved Johnny told, and when I mentioned to them to inspire the youth of Beloit, they told me to proceed. The Beloit School District has made many historical contributions to the state of Wisconsin, and Johnny is one of those stories. For example, when they built the new high school in 1950, it was decided to add the word memorial to Beloit to honor the greatest generation who fought and saved the world for democracy and built America. And the school district wanted to honor their contribution. The recognition that we have proposed, naming the court at the Barkin Arena, the Johnny Watts Court, will tie together the historical nature of the Beloit basketball program. From the Jacobson Field to the Barkin Arena to the Johnny Watts Court, Herb Jacobson called Johnny the greatest ball player he ever coached, and Bernie Barkin revered Johnny. Without the recognition of Johnny, the story is incomplete. Johnny's story is being worked on to feature during Beloit Heritage Days in September, and it would be great at that time to announce a recognition of the family's beloved Johnny with the announcement of the naming of the court in his honor. As I mentioned, if you have any questions, myself, the Watts family, Dorothy Harrell, Dr. Gregory Bond at the University of Notre Dame, and other people in the Beloit community that I have talked to about this would be glad to answer your questions. We await your decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons.
Next, I have James H. And Melissa is yielding her 3 minutes.
Hello, James Hoy, teacher at the high school and BEA co-president. I just wanted to come clarify a few things that were talked about in the last board meeting and comment on a few new topics. The first one being health insurance increases. During the last board meeting, Mr. Chady discussed the planned health insurance increases for employees. And I appreciate that he acknowledged that it's not really a cost savings, it's a cost shift onto your employees. But while Mr. Chady tried to pass off the increases as minimal because we pay less than other districts in Rock County, a few things need to be mentioned. All of the districts in Rock County do not have the same healthcare plans. It's not comparing apples to apples to say that we have it good because we're only increasing from 2% to 4% while Janesville might pay 10%. They're not the same plans. Also, I should point out that for many years, employees gave up pay increases to maintain healthcare costs. And so while we may pay a lower percentage compared to other districts, we do so because we gave up pay increases for years to do that. A newer topic, the HSA contribution. The district is proposing changing to the distribution schedule, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but it does concern us for certain employees. Some employees rely on expensive medication, and they rely on getting that HSA contribution from the district at the beginning of the school year to pay for that expensive medication. I understand the district's concern with employees leaving during the school year and taking that money with them. I'm just wondering if there's a different alternative. Could the district include a payback clause into contracts or put some language into the handbook to say that an employee has to pay that money back if they leave the district? That seems like a solution that may solve that problem. Furlough days. Again, I want to reiterate that the BEA is firmly against the proposed plan for furlough days. Board Member Levy, I appreciate your question to Mr. Chady last week or a couple weeks ago about furlough days and the goal of avoiding layoffs. But it doesn't have to be one or the other. There are other options to avoid furlough days that would not result in layoffs. Cuts in other areas could be made. A deficit budget could be adopted to show the staff and the community that you support paying your staff a fair wage. Will the board take a stand on furlough days before the school year begins? Here we are in the middle of July with teachers returning in 6 weeks. The first proposed furlough day is at the end of August on a teacher workday. Will the board allow this plan to continue? On the agenda tonight is the expulsion process. I spoke to the board last month about returning to the previous expulsion process, and I encourage the board to support the proposal on the agenda tonight to return to the previous process. A couple new ones, the Ad Hoc Budget Finance Committee. I came to the meeting Friday. There's a lot of discussion about the timing of the committee and when that committee should end. And it seemed like there's a lot of discussion about when it should end, and you guys voted to wrap it up no later than January 31st, or maybe it was December 31st. But my question is why? Why not let that committee continue? No matter what the committee comes up with for this budget, chances are we're gonna have to cut the budget for next year. So why not let that committee continue so they can get a jump start on next year's budget? So that we're not in the same position we are now where that committee is gonna try to cram in months of work in 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Dr. Garrison, during the meeting on Friday, you mentioned a need to spend a great deal of time educating the committee on school finance. And I agree, it's a complicated topic. However, I don't see the need for that at this time. The committee has such a short time frame to examine the budget, the proposed budget cuts, and to make recommendations to the finance committee. I encourage the board to get this committee up and running quickly. Time is running out to make meaningful budget recommendations. Don't let the clock run out on this year's budget. And finally, a referendum. Obviously, passing a referendum has been difficult for this district for a variety of reasons. And you guys are currently discussing when or if to have another referendum. I challenge the district administration and the school board to put together a referendum question that is very pro-student and pro-staff. The community has spoken. To have any chance of passing, a referendum must include an itemized list of specific spending. The second go-around did improve over the first go-around as far as having specific spending ideas, but we need an itemized list. Tell the community exactly what you want the money for. We want X amount of dollars to hire more paraeducators. We want X amount of dollars to pay paraeducators more. We want X amount of dollars to pay our teachers a fair wage. At the same time, though, the district has to put together a list of very specific cuts it has made. Do this and then leave it up to the community. Does the community really want to support their students and staff? Challenge Eyes on Beloit. They claim to support students and teachers. Put out a referendum like this and challenge them to support it. The BEA is dedicated to working with the district to find solutions to all of these concerns, and we're still willing to negotiate a salary settlement for next year that both sides can support. Thank you.
May I ask a clarifying question?
Sure thing.
Thank you so much. Just really quick, thank you for everything that you brought up. With respect to referendum, is there a preference of when we go to referendum? And if you're not comfortable with answering that question, I can, just if you're comfortable.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey. Ms. Schultz?
Next, I have Dorothy.
Thank you, Michelle. Dorothy Harrell, 2284 Boulder Court, Beloit, Wisconsin. One of the first lessons you learn in organizational leadership is that any organization that doesn't follow its own policies and practices is bound to fail. So I'm happy to note, though, that I also know that great minds think alike. So I want to thank President Johnson and Mrs. Levy for the discussion about my first topic that I was going to bring forward, which was the meeting of July 3rd, when 2A on the agenda was gender process use discussion. And you've already explained what happened. That was my inquiry, was around why that had occurred like it did and how it ended up back at the board and now wasn't on the board agenda. So you've explained that, and I thank you for that. The other question that I had as an inquiry was around the revisiting the hearing officer, and I've heard that answered already this evening too. That was a concern of mine. So I want to thank you in advance. Thank you for being in advance of my inquiry by bringing all those issues forward, because that agenda item appearing again was very concerning to me, because I thought we had a resolution to how we were going to address a school discipline issue. So thank you very much. I look forward to hearing what happens with that. I also want to say, in addition, that I do support Mr. Simmons in his efforts around recognition for this talented, excellent individual who has not gotten the recognition that he earned and does deserve. And the community needs to know more about him, and that might make it easier for the board to support this. But I really hope that you will look into it thoroughly and find that you can support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Harrell. Ms. Schultz?
Next, I have Pam, and she has Cheryl and Pierre yielding time.
Sorry. Good evening, board members. I'm Pam Charles, former board member and former board president. And I'm here to talk to you tonight about several things. First of all, the budget and the ad hoc committee. Policy 620 reads, "The Board of Education shall consider and adopt an annual operating budget for the school district of Beloit. The budget shall be based upon the educational needs and financial ability of the district." Keyword there, educational needs and financial ability. The budget reduction process should have begun in January. Budget cuts need to be an ongoing conversation, as Mr. Hoey suggested. The superintendent began this budget reduction process by introducing cuts to teachers and programs: 20 teachers, a school counselor, elimination of middle school choir, and furlough days. Presentations were made, and the board was led to believe that there was no need to vote on these things at that time. But as you'll discover when the budget is presented to you in October, the board's failure to vote on these items was your unintentional approval of these items. Because once that budget is handed to you in October, there's no time for this. Okay, the end of October will be too late to examine it all and to make changes. Budgets have to be passed then so that we can set levies and property tax bills can be made and mailed out. What comes to you in October is it. So, I'm sorry that you just let those things go. And now staff is assuming that those changes have been accepted by you. And I have to kind of agree with that, because that's what it looks like at this point. Remember your board policy. The budget shall be based upon the educational needs and financial ability of the district. The administrative building and its staff cannot be the sacred cow. This COLAC building cannot be the sacred cow of the 2024-25 budget reduction process. The board cannot expect COLAC administrators to cut salaries, or positions of other COLAC administrators. An ad hoc committee composed of qualified, unbiased individuals from our community is volunteering to study the needs and priorities of our students and recommend a $10 million budget cut for the board's consideration. And when the recommendation comes forward, I hope this board will remember that the School District of Beloit is not in the people business. We're in the education business. Please keep the education of Beloit's children as your top priority. The ad hoc committee on tonight's agenda is 6 months overdue. The district is already spending our 2024-25 funds with no budget approved, and school will be starting again very soon with no final decisions made as far as staffing classrooms and administrative positions. We could make the cuts at second semester, but then we'd have to make twice as many cuts to get the same budget reduction amounts. And there are issues of student-teacher relationships and continuity in our schools to also consider. Ad hoc committees have the very specific purpose of studying issues and bringing recommendations to the board. The board should become familiar with other types of committees as well that you might use for other reasons. I heard it discussed here that a finance transparency committee formed to educate community members about school finance and budgets is something that, and then share that information with the public, is something that the superintendent was interested in. That wouldn't be an ad hoc committee. That would be totally inappropriate for an ad hoc committee. So I was glad to see that you changed that to something that we really need and something that will actually be studying issues and making recommendations to the board. But that type of a committee could be formed. It would just be a different type of committee, maybe a superintendent committee or an administrative committee. Ad hoc committees that study district finances and budgets and bring recommendations are not at all unheard of. I sent you all an example of just one district tonight, but I can find more. The board has experts in our community willing to step up. Please welcome them and facilitate their work. If in the end you're not pleased with their recommendations, you're not required to adopt those recommendations. Now, I'd like to talk a minute about the expulsion hearing officer. The resolution to have an expulsion hearing officer conduct expulsions the way it has been done in our district for as long as anyone in this room can remember is coming back this evening for a second consideration. There's no doubt that the board is making fair decisions. That's not what anyone is. No one's accusing you of making unfair decisions or not performing your duties. But there are many fewer expulsions coming forward nowadays. And the reason is not because behavior has improved. Ask any teacher. Staff and building administrators sense a lack of support and fear of retaliation in the expulsion process. Removing the board from the direct interaction with staff in the expulsion hearing might help staff to feel more comfortable enforcing the code of conduct. Our teachers and students are leaving in droves due to the discipline issues. That's the number one reason people are leaving. The independent hearing officer makes sound, fair, and impartial expulsion decisions, and the board still has the final say. You still have that final authority to say, I accept his recommendation, I want to change his recommendation, or we're not going to accept it at all. It's the board's say still. Our schools are out of control. If you care about teacher retention and student achievement, please support returning to the former process of student expulsions being held by a hearing officer. And rather than just rewrite this today, I just decided, I hope Mr. Chady doesn't mind, but I just decided to read a letter that I sent to him in the wee hours of the morning. Mr. Chady, regarding this contract, as I was looking at the HES contract that I stumbled on online, regarding this contract, it's clear that the district does have a say in janitorial staffing issues and HES personnel changes in our schools. It's disappointing to see yet another example of our district appearing to not care about kids, families, and staff by not intervening in this forced transfer of an employee who is making a positive difference in the lives of children who have built relationships with him. One has to wonder if there is more to this than is being shared. But clearly, you have a say in this situation, Mr. Chady. You can stop the transfer and make a school full of children, staff, and families happy. Relationships between all staff and students are important. I recall the janitor who worked at Morgan School when my kids attended there. Mr. Jeffers was his name. He watched out for the kids. He noticed everything that went on in that building. Mr. Jeffers knew the children by name and built relationships with them. He kept an eye on them as he worked. One day, my son lost his favorite jacket at school. We went in that afternoon and asked Mr. Jeffers if he happened to see it anywhere. He opened his closet, and it was hanging there. He knew whose jacket it was and was holding on to it to return it to Pierre. I still recall that today because it occurred to me at the moment how much that man cared about the kids in the building. He was an integral part of Morgan School and their experience as students at Morgan School. Robinson School is going through many personnel changes right now. I hope that you'll reread all the letters from children and families that were presented 2 weeks ago during public comment and reconsider this relocation of a man who is making such a difference in the lives of our students. You can advertise all day long on the radio and YouTube, but what's going on in our buildings is what really matters. That's what makes families and staff decide to stay or leave. Please show them that you care by getting this decision reversed. And for the last just minute or so, I just want to say, Greg, that was an awfully nice thing you did, apologizing to Tia. If this board could just get along better, that would be wonderful. And if you could please take a workshop, get a workshop in Robert's Rules of Order, because debating about why something didn't come to the agenda before the agenda is approved, no, that's not even on the agenda. The discussion of that policy was not on the agenda. That was out of order, that entire debate. If there's a discussion about the agenda, it's about what's on the agenda, not what's not on the agenda, because every person here could have raised their hand and said, well, I wanted this, I wanted that. It's not the way it goes. Please learn Robert's Rules of Order so that people are not humiliated at the board meetings and people's voices aren't cut off and people learn the proper way of doing things, because that's the only way that we can all really have our voices heard, through our representatives functioning by the rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Charles. Ms. Schultz?
May I? Just real
I'm sorry,
quick.
I didn't-
Thank you. Since Ms. Charles brought up the email that she sent my way, and my apologies for not being able to respond to that yet today, I will inform all, the board, the public as well, that the entire HES custodial staffing at Robinson School has been replaced. There were concerns throughout the past school year about the cleanliness of that building. HES has invested a lot of time in supervision and oversight of that and made the decision that they needed to replace both first and second shift staffing. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Chady. Ms. Schultz?
Excuse me, next I have Carol and her time. She has Frank and Susan yielding time for her.
My name is Carol Fox. I was an elementary principal in this district for 19 years, and before that I was a principal in Michigan for 4 and a teacher in Minnesota for 12. In all of these districts, we had major budget cutting issues. Cutting budgets in schools is unfortunately a frequent occurrence. All the work in all these districts was done through committees consisting of stakeholders, district personnel, parents, community members, even students. These groups studied the issues, argued and debated over options, and provided recommendations to the board. I came to your meeting 2 weeks ago because I was concerned that this wasn't the process being used. I left appalled, upset, and angry as I discovered that no one has done the work at all. Your budget just started July 1st. There's nothing preliminary about this budget. This budget is here and now. You have over $10 million to cut this year, and you have at least $7 million to go. It's July, school starts in 6 weeks, and Dr. Garrison doesn't even want to have a conversation about layoffs. I think you and the community need a reality check. People need to understand what a $10 million cut means to a district like ours. It means that you cannot leave programming and staffing intact. It also means you can't just cut administrators and think everything's going to be fixed. Throughout a budget cutting process, it has to be clearly understood that our purpose is to educate our children. The priority is to preserve classroom and core subject teachers to the best of our ability. You have to look at the whole district, ask questions. Are we running classes that are too small? Can we combine students in buildings in different ways to streamline services? What are some of the programs that have been put in place that are not part of the core system anymore? What are the consequences of removing these programs? How can you meet the needs of the students if you do? So you start by looking at enrollments. You should have a packet. There's extra packets up here if anybody wants them. Your first page is the average class size that came from your facility study done last November. Your average class size is quite a bit smaller than your targets, especially at the high school, which has average class sizes of 18. When you are cutting a budget, you reduce sections and provide services more efficiently. Your next page is a list of non-classroom staff that I found using your website's staff directory. There are likely more positions to be found. The list includes various academic coaches, art, music, PE teachers, social workers, principals, anyone that didn't look like a classroom teacher. The list does not include paraeducators, and I also made myself a list of all the COLAC staff. Then I went to the DPI WiseDash and downloaded the personnel databases for Beloit. From that, I had reasonably accurate salary information to determine cost effects. The next pages in your packet are the salary information. The first page at the top has the average teacher salary. Then you have assistant principals and COLAC personnel in the next pages, all listed by name, salary, the number of days they work, so on and so forth. So once you have data like this, you can start putting information together, decide on possible cuts, and see what it looks like. So I made a sample. On the next page, you see in orange, those numbers are Mr. Chady's numbers with the $6.9 million left to go. In the blue, I added back in $3.5 million to account for the cuts that were theoretically in the preliminary budget, as there are going to be overlaps in staff cuts. So then I looked at some cuts. What can you do? So I did program specialties. This staff to me looks like they are probably licensed teachers who could move into the classroom. I'm assuming that most of them are coaching other teachers and do not work directly with students. If you look at that, I have listed 43 positions at $3.2 million. Then I looked at assistant principals. There you have 6 elementary, 2 middle school, and 2 high school, is what I chose. I know these people do a lot of work, especially discipline, but at this point, I don't know that we can afford them. Then I went to central office. Some of them are linked with academic coaches, and some of them, I don't know what they do. I just picked. So then if you go to the next page, you'll see that I added in the 12 other staff that were listed on the preliminary budget, the counselor, the data clerk, et cetera, that were there. So I'm putting things back in that you have already cut out. And $1 million for all the other stuff mentioned, which are listed at the bottom of the next page. You add it all together, you get a cut of 72 staff people, including what you would consider administrators, 17, for a total about $7 million. Even if you did all of that stuff, you are still $3 million short. On the next page, I had a list of people to consider, other things to consider, like transportation costs, closing COLAC and selling the building, other options to look at. And then I have a page of other concerns and suggestions of things that I thought about that won't fit into 9 minutes. Does this look ugly to you? It looks ugly to me. And there should be discussions around the feasibility, desirability, and the consequences, intended or unintended, for doing any of these things. And I'm not saying that's what you should do. I'm putting on the table, with projected dollar amounts attached, something that should be discussed, debated, and argued about. But you do have to do something, and do something quickly. If you wait until like the semester, January, to make cuts like these, that 43 people has turned into 86, because you are paying the salaries of these people. You're spending money out of this budget right now. So if you want to be making cuts and have a balanced budget by the end of the year, you better get to work. You've got to do something. This work should have started last fall. To be done right, a process like this takes a lot of time. You should have had a plan ready to go before you went to referendum this spring. Have you never heard of contingency plans? Good administrators create them and good boards ask for them. But now you have to decide what you're going to do. There has to be a plan that you can implement as soon as possible. How you decide to come up with that plan is up to you. It's your responsibility. The Board of Education is tasked with overseeing the resources of the district. Your job is fiscal oversight. and to ensure that there's a balanced budget. And I'm curious about what you thought was going to happen. You're not even having conversations about layoffs, and you have a $10 million deficit. Are you planning to just use up your fund balance and probably go negative and think you've solved anything? You're kicking the can down the road. That just means next year's going to be way worse. And are you just ignoring it, hoping it's going to go away? If you are thinking you can just be transparent with the public, not make any meaningful cuts and layoffs, spend down your fund balance to nothing or worse, and then think you're going to convince people to pass a referendum, I think you're dead wrong. You have an enormous task ahead of you. The only item I think you should add to the budget at this point is the expulsion hearing officer. I don't think the board should be involved at that level of expulsion process, but frankly, you don't have time. You need to be focused on your budget crisis. That's it. That is your focus. This process is painful, ugly, heartbreaking, and it only gets painful and uglier the longer it goes on. You are morally and ethically obligated to your staff and students to figure out how to fix this crisis and balance your budget. Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. Ms. Schultz?
That's all the comments that I have in the room. I have one online.
Thank you.
I apologize. This comment is from Susan from the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters Beloit would like to comment on several decisions of the School District of Beloit Board. Number one, transparency is very important for good government. We noticed that this week's agenda changed a couple of times this last week before being finalized. This practice makes board transparency and adherence to open meetings law more difficult to maintain. Number two, the School District of Beloit Board needs to be transparent on all potential agenda items that may change the outcome of the budget when budgets are currently being scrutinized, i.e. hiring of an expulsion officer versus board reviewing expulsion cases. Before rushing to change any practice, the board should fully examine the pros and cons, including the financial cost and social effects for each practice. For example, with this decision, how will the expulsion rate change? What are the reasons for the change? What do teachers and administrators say about the two systems? Number three, we see that there will be an ad hoc committee to assist in giving budgetary recommendations to the Finance Committee. This sounds like a good idea, but before knowing whether appointees can be effective committee members, we need to know your guidelines for the committee. What is the deadline? Have you set how often they will meet and when? Thank you for your attention.
Ms. Schultz, did you receive the one from Susan Niles that was submitted at 8:50 this morning?
I did not see it. Let me double check.
It was to public comment, and I was carbon copied on it.
You said it was sent to public comment? I don't have it in the public comment.
I'll go ahead and read it.
Okay, my apologies. I don't know why it's not showing up for me.
Okay, bear with me while I enlarge my font. I am writing to you, and this comes from Susan Niles. I am writing to you to let you know of my support of returning to expulsion hearings in our schools. In the past several years, unruly students have come to learn that bad behaviors have no consequences in our school system. I hope that reinstating consequences might help to make our schools safer and help to improve the learning environment. My family have all been proud Beloit Memorial alumni, but I am sad to say that this year my youngest granddaughter has transferred out of the Beloit Public Schools and will be attending Lincoln Academy. This is partially due to the closing of both West Side middle schools and partially due to the chaotic environment in the schools. My granddaughter was witness to disruptive students frequently causing problems in classes only to return day after day with no consequences. She saw violent students return to bully other students without punishment. My daughter gave Aldridge this year to see if things were any better, but it was not so. She opted to enroll her youngest daughter into the Lincoln Academy. I hope the school district, the Beloit School District, can make and improve to be the well-respected district it once was. We cannot continue to cater to the worst among the students and see those students that want to learn pushed aside while their teachers are busy trying to maintain order in an out-of-control environment. Sincerely, Susan Niles. And that brings us to reports to the board, the academic achievement, strategic plan, and academic data update.
Thank you, Board President Johnson. I have before you the presentation that we will be conducting tonight in reference to our strategic plan. First of all, let me just say that we did have a conversation about our strategic plan back in November. And in November, the reason why we did it in November, first of all, was because, prior to my arrival, a strategic plan was adopted. And with that being stated, my arrival happened in November. Of course, from November to June, a lot of different changes had to happen here in the school district. And so we did do a year-end review, strategic plan update in November. And we're coming back to you again with an additional strategic plan review as it pertains to our work here as a school district. Let me just say this, and I'm going to just be very kind in the thought. Everything that happens in the school district, I take full responsibility for. I think sometimes that goes without saying, but I want to make sure that's publicly stated as well. It is my job, it is my duty to bring to the board, issues that we may have, and the strategic plan does give us a clear opportunity to address some of those issues. But additionally, I want to, make sure it's clearly stated that in our strategic plan, it talks about many different themes. We have equity, culture and leadership, whole child, finance, and engagement. And when I think about each of these items, and I'm not going to read each of those specific bullet points to you all. You all have this strategic plan, of course. I know you've reviewed it. I know you probably have seen some of the thoughts here as well. But when it comes to the areas of equity and when it comes to the area of culture and leadership, whole child, finance, and engagement, there's work that we yet have to complete. That's what a strategic plan is. There's work in our district that we have yet to complete. That's what a strategic plan causes us to do. I hear a lot of conversations about how our district is not what it once was. And unfortunately, I can tell you this. I shouldn't say unfortunately. I want to say this publicly. I'm not sure what was in the past. I know that our district now is moving in a direction that I believe we would want all of our community members to see. I would ask that every community member that has had both positive and negative things to say about us, come see what we're doing right now. Come see what we're doing right now. I know our schools have opportunities of growth, and that'll be any building that you can pick. But I also know there are some great things happening in our buildings. And that's some of the things that aren't oftentimes talked about in the public. And so in our school district, we do hear about the great things that are happening. In our day-to-day classrooms, we do hear about some of the great things that people are seeing. But again, in the public, there's a different perception at times around what is actually happening and what isn't happening. And so I would ask that the public give us a chance to show you all what we are doing now. Come see our buildings. We've offered the opportunities for many people to come and look at what we're doing right now. And I promise you will see a wide gambit of different themes that we're doing. But you won't see that our buildings are out of control. You won't see that our teachers can't teach in the classroom. I truly believe that that's a possibility, those are opportunities for us to make improvements in. And so in our strategic plan, we address some of those themes naturally, and we're going to walk through that conversation today. I do have with me, of course, my executive team that'll help me, walk through this conversation. We do have a little bit of time to discuss this, and of course, as we go through the presentation with the board, please feel free to, raise a hand and ask us questions as we go through. It'll be very important that you all do that. Otherwise, you kind of get all those questions at the end, and it makes it a little bit harder to find what slide you were referring to. There are about 40 slides in this presentation, but we will get through them within the time frame that was given to us. And so again, our strategic plan has 5 areas: equity, culture and leadership, whole child, finance, and engagement. In each of these areas, again, we are working towards the opportunities of development. This strategic plan does end next year, so the 25-26 school year, and we'll have to re-engage that conversation around strategic planning and what we want to, use moving forward. But I do want to make sure that that's also something that's noted in the conversation. We are making progress as a preemptive thought, but we do still have a ways to go. This is technically start of year 2 of our strategic plan, and I'm excited to share some of the information, of course, with my team. Mrs. Mortek will walk us through a couple of these slides. At the end, of course, Mrs. Beavers, Mrs. Christopa, Dee Almendaris, and of course, Mr. Chady will also have a few slides. And I'll start off with the equity slide. Mrs. Mortek.
Would you mind putting it in slideshow presentation? That's a little larger on the screen for people watching it online. Thank you.
I think this is, let me see.
Yeah, just go to presentation
There we go.
mode. Thank you so much.
No problem.
So the sharing of the updates in the strategic plan happened in November of this year also. So if you go back to that slide presentation, you'll see all of the things that we were doing leading up to November. So some of the things that are populated on the slide now are similar because they're ongoing, and then there are some new things on these slides as well. Not wanting to read everything to you and all of the bullet points, I just wanted to highlight some things. Specifically, something that we have been working on cross-departmental with the Teaching and Learning Department and Pupil Services is our ESSA work. And that was based on identifications that came out of federal funding with our special education population and then some of our other racial groupings. And so that's some work that we've been doing to develop action plans. And we have synced those up with school improvement planning as well. So that's really good because we're getting to have a tighter system of coherence around bringing together federal identifications with localized school improvement plans that ties to title funds. And then the other thing I wanted to say where it says launch 2024 under equity for data structures, we are excited to announce that we have worked behind the scenes to have our frontline student analytics dashboard. This has been an ongoing project, and I am excited that we are at a space now where we will be launching that with our administrators August 7th and 9th, and then that'll carry over into the Admin Academy, and then, of course, to inform the schools going forward. This is a real-time dashboard that helps us to look at all kinds of data in a way that we haven't had access to so easily before. And I think that that's going to help us to really dig in to build systems and structures around data and looking at data. And I always say that we're values-driven, data-informed. And so looking forward to that.
Thanks. Next slide. The next area is culture and leadership. And I'm just going to focus on the 3 objective areas: belonging and trust, leadership and staffing, and collective efficacy. And like Ms. Mortek said, I'll just give a high-level overview for the sake of time, and you will start to hear maybe some overlaps in the activities that we are implementing, and that's okay because we want it to hit multiple areas in the strategic plan. So the area of belonging and trust, the activities that we're focusing on here are really about cultivating and building authentic relationships between and amongst students, staff, families, and the community. It's really about creating a welcoming and inclusive environment where all people are seen, heard, and valued. So, like Board Member Hankins said tonight, we have a lot of summer engagement activities that was very successful last summer, so we're continuing that again this summer with great engagement from our community and our families. We've been intentional with the signage and the messaging in our schools with dual language, focusing also on gender inclusivity. We've talked about that a lot. And seeing self in our buildings, ensuring that students are seeing themselves while at school in the curriculum, in the artwork, and in the staff that they're being taught by every single day. Objective B, leadership and staffing. This objective area really focuses on creating systems that promote recruitment and retention, a system that promotes continuous improvement to ensure the success of all of our students. We continued doing learning walks this year cross-departmentally with staff in buildings as well as administrative staff, and Ms. Mortek led instructional rounds, which is going and visiting classrooms in other schools and collaborating with your colleagues on what you're seeing, what you're hearing, and what needs to be improved on. We continued working, leaning in on the work of impactful coaching, expanding our audience to build capacity in our staff. There's been work in our HR department around onboarding, job duties, and performance evaluations. And we've also been working on getting ourselves at career fairs. In fact, we held our first, now second, district career fair post-COVID to focus on recruitment. Objective C is collective efficacy. This objective area focuses on the idea that we all can and will positively impact our students. Like Ms. Mortek said, we have been doing a lot of cross-departmental work to look at our systems and really improving our systems as we continue to engage in clear cycles of reflection in regards to student outcomes. We continue with Todos Unidos to encourage the engagement of our Spanish-speaking family. We've expanded our bilingual homeschool liaisons into family advocate positions to in hopes of reaching more students and families. And then we continue to recognize our community partners. We're very grateful for the partnerships that we have because those partners really help provide support to our students, staff, and families. Pass it back to you.
Ms. Beavers?
Yes.
Thank you for this. The onboarding of staff, I'm hoping, not necessarily today, but at some point, I'd like to learn more about that. And Ms. Mortek, not just onboarding staff, but when we have students come into the district, what is the onboarding process for our students? So just put a pin in that if you can. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so let me just log in here. Okay. Sorry, Dr. Garrison, I need to read off of this screen because my eyes are not good enough to be up there. Okay, so for the whole child, remember that hits all of the things in regards to academic achievement and then social, emotional learning and well-being. And so we'll talk about those different areas. Again, some of these things were already included in the November update that we gave to the board. So just going to highlight a few things. This year, we finished year 3 implementation of our American Reading Company. That's our foundational skills and beyond literacy in grades kindergarten through 5th grade. Year 2 implementation of Character Strong, that's our and Purposeful People in 7 Mindsets for SAL learning. Year 1 implementation of Frog Street 4K and also Eureka Math K-8. Many of our materials that we used post-COVID were poorly rated on third-party review systems, specifically EdReports, which is a common third-party reviewer of curriculum. So we have invested in that, and it was wise of the board to do that at the time when we had ESSER funds, Because, for example, many people are now having to adopt or think about adopting new curriculum, specifically in reading post-COVID, and they don't have those funds. And so I am excited about the work that we are doing. Materials don't automatically mean student outcomes, right? The most important thing in a school is an effective, highly qualified teacher. And so we are also coupled with doing a lot of work on instructional practices. When you adopt materials, the teacher, and I was a teacher for, I think it was 14 years, you have to learn the materials. And so year one is really just learning how the materials were designed. And as you dig into those next years, you're really thinking about the instructional practices and understanding what we call pedagogy, the groundings of why the materials were designed the way that they were. And so moving into this next school year, we're going to be really focusing on digging more into instructional practices and building the toolboxes of our teachers and our building leadership, and thinking about high-quality instructional practices that can be found in all classrooms. So we'll have a rollout of that. We have our Act 20 professional learning plan designed. We've landed on our vendor, and we will continue to be within compliance with that legislation. And a separate presentation, there'll be more to come on that plan for going into the school year. Another thing that we did, if you look at the very bottom, to create meaningful pathways for students, we've worked very hard over the last couple years, cross-departmental with Ford NGL and the high school to align pathways. And so there's a lot of excitement there because we have, if you go on our course guide, when you go on our website, you'll see now how those pathways are spelled out and how we have advanced or enrichment learning opportunities tied to it when you're going through that pathway. So that might lead to a certification or a dual credit, an AP course, those types of things. And so that's exciting work. And then later in the data, I can show you some of the data that we have for our advanced placement courses as well. Yes, please. That's on the next slide.
Social emotional learning, the objective here is just to focus on strengthening our system, so I'll try to be higher level here because I know. So continuing to develop a district-wide culture rooted in restorative justice, reviewing and revising the code of conduct and any related policies and practices to support equitable practices. That's an in-process work. These cross-departmental learning walks that I referenced on the last slide, really embedding not just the academics, but also social emotional practices into all content areas, not just a standalone. The equitable multi-level systems of support. You've probably heard this tiered intervention. We really started level setting around this on like team size, required members, meeting cadence, responsibilities, and making sure the master schedule reflects uninterrupted time for explicit social emotional learning opportunities to take place K-12. I'll let you kind of read the rest. The next slide is health and wellness, and this objective focuses on ensuring equitable access to health and wellness resources for our students. We've expanded our on-site medical providers for acute and chronic conditions, as well as offering immunization clinics and sports physicals for our students and families. We've provided group therapy sessions for our teen parent programs. For the second year in a row, we're offering nutritional classes for high school and intermediate students over summer through UW Extensions, which is a partner of ours. We've had a significant expansion of our Seal a Smile program, almost doubling the number of students that we've seen this past year. We're providing health education for students being referred for vaping or tobacco use in the schools. And we've expanded our referral pathway for students, families, and staff needing mental health support to now include social services support as well. So if we have somebody with food insecurities, housing insecurities, or needing medical or dental, we have that referral pathway as well. And I will pass it to my colleague, Monica.
Thank you. One of the things you're going to notice is there's a lot of intersection between all of the pillars in our strategic plan. So lots of ways in which all of us are intersecting. I'm going to focus on students, families, and community, and then Ms. Almendares is going to come forward and talk about staff. One of the things that we've been working on this summer, which actually started last fall, is a very comprehensive attendance and absenteeism program, not only district-wide, but in our schools. And Pupil Services and Marketing and Communications have been working on that with a rollout on August 10th. More to come on that. It'll be a great presentation to share with the board. But no, again, working on that objective that all of you have brought forward to us and is a part of our plan. We have implemented community circles. That's opportunities for students to feel a part of that school, a part of the building, a part of our district family meeting. And that is actually spread out through and from Pupil Services. The other thing we really made a commitment to and have been is elevating our student voices within the district. And we've done that a lot of ways through marketing and communications in student-led marketing and communications programs, giving them opportunities to speak in front of groups, taking them places for Green Bay Packers, for example, and letting them speak and showcase our district, using them in our radio, having them be a part of our podcast. So we've given students an opportunity. There's others, but I'm highlighting those. In terms of our families, we've increased communication channels, but also allowed for feedback to come back through the district. It's one thing to be communicating to our families, it's another thing to reach out and ask for their feedback, providing them avenues to do that. Again, Ms. Beavers mentioned our summer engagement activities, year 2. We also have done data tracking on our communication accessibility. Who is accessing our communication channels at what level? Are there other ways for us to look at that? So that data is available, and we've been collecting that for 2 years now. And then we have worked with the principals and teachers on their dojo communication, making sure if they need Spanish translation, that's available, or if they're looking for specific messaging, marketing and communications is available to help them. So I'm going to have Ms. Almendares come and speak about staff, and I'll be back up with community.
Good evening. For staff, we have been conducting the staff climate surveys. I think that of importance here has been the turnover in superintendents and creating action plans with the results of those climate surveys. However, we are ensuring that the overall information does make its way to the board at this time to increase participation next year, and also so that we have more informed decision-making opportunities moving forward. We are currently on year 1 being completed of the HR and principals meeting. This is conducted every other Friday here at Keck. It's an opportunity for our administrators to visit and let us know what is going on in their buildings, what areas they feel they need more support. It started as an HR initiative. However, based on the needs that were being brought forth by the principals, we have expanded participation to other departments so that they can get answers to their questions more readily. We have also conducted exit interviews in person for the first time this year. We're trying to provide a warmer exchange of information and derive critical feedback from our departing staff to, again, help us with directing our retention plans moving forward. And of course, we continue hosting through our communications department, as well as our superintendent's office, our All-Star Awards, the years of recognition, retirements, teacher appreciation, et cetera, so that we let our staff know at different stages in their employment with the district that they are valued and that we do recognize them for what they bring to our district.
I'll go to community now. We do have an ongoing, we're in our third year of community awards and recognition. So anything I'm talking about community related here is easily accessible on our website. Those are hosted here at COLAC, and our students, staff, anyone can recommend an award and recognition be given to a community partner. We also recognize students and staff at those. Again, they're all on the website. We have a monthly community newsletter. People can sign up for that on our website. This is our really first year doing that, implemented in the fall, and it has an opportunity for us to share that information out. The GBEDC had a strong commitment this year. Board member Greg Schneider sits on that. They meet quarterly, about 15 to 20 community members, business members. We have an opportunity to interact with them, talk about what's happening in the high school. They talk about the academies, students have spoke, others. Again, increasing that community engagement. As well as on top of that, each one of the academies has an advisory committee. Those will be coming to fruition by the start of this school year. The new academy coach, Brian Michaels, is picking up where Deb Prowse had laid it down, but look for that.
Oh, this is Jeff Bauer.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had one more slide. Dr. Garrison? One of the other things, based on some feedback from our community, is getting to know the people that work in our district. We are hosting a coffee every month at the Blender Cafe at the library, in which each department, including our schools, will be there one night a month just to meet with the public, talk about what we do, and share information. Another thing to come out of our community engagement process. Thank you.
Ms. Christopher, are these dates from the 23-24 school year, or are these the dates that are for this next upcoming year?
For this upcoming year, and we're getting ready to do a news release on them and a full marketing press August 1st.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Within our finance priority area, there's three main objectives. The first of which is stabilized budget. We certainly all can appreciate the complexity and the challenges that we have there. Happy to report that we were able to bring forward a balanced budget for the 23-24 school year back in late October. We're currently working on closing out the 23-24 school year, doing some accounting work, and we posted a transaction, a pretty significant transaction this afternoon that unfortunately is not favorable to the district, but it is what it is. Everybody's well aware that we had an operating referendum question on the ballot back in April. Unfortunately, we were not successful with that. I understand, I think I have a good appreciation for the reasons why. And hopefully that's not a end-all be-all, but hopefully there's perhaps an opportunity for a potential passage with some future referendum. So looking forward. We all know of the budget deficits that we're facing in efforts to work to close those budget deficits, and addressing that's really a two-pronged approach. There's the revenue side, where we can review our revenues to see if there's any opportunities to generate new revenues, increased revenues, perhaps a little bit, but not overly significantly. And then, of course, we need to look at the expenditure side and look for opportunities to reduce our spending accordingly. Another of the objectives, Dr. Garrison, if you can go to the next slide, talk about equitable resourcing. Here within this past year, really about a year or so ago now, was the closure of two of our schools and relocation of that programming in an attempt to be a little bit more efficient with our operations. In the strategic plan itself, with regards to equitable resourcing, it speaks to monitoring and reviewing enrollment data and adjusting facilities and personnel, et cetera. We did complete the enrollment study, which came to the board back in February, if I recall correctly. And of course, that'll be used as a guidepost to adjust what our expectations are for the future. And then transparency and communication. probably an opportunity for us to do better at, but there's opportunities here. You know, we've tried to bolster and increase the board reports to the board in an opportunity to be transparent with those monthly financials and some of the other requirements, board policy requirements that we address. We did participate in that Know Your Local Government Property Tax Series at the Beloit Public Library this past March, I think. And then there were some discussions about that financial transparency group. I appreciate the comments from earlier this evening. And perhaps more importantly, the ad hoc committee work that's yet to come. So.
So this next space here is speaking about our different data streams that we have and here in our district. Of course, we have, of course, our state report card. Naturally, this is a space in which we share our results throughout each year. We have had some success in this conversation over the past 2 years in this administration, and with the help of our teachers and, of course, administration. Naturally, our students, I'd like to say thank you. We, of course, have our climate and data, discipline and attendance. You know, of course, we've heard some of the thoughts around discipline here in our school district. And again, there is work to yet be done there. But I also want to make sure that the other side of that is heard as well. We have decreased some of our disciplinary efforts here in the school district as well. One of the statements that I've made before, and then I'll make it again, you know, when we had, you know, 94 plus administrative hearings, the conversations was our district was going out of control. And then when we decreased those conversations, the same conversations our district still needs to, you know, to improve. My goal is, again, to keep making those improvements, okay? And that's something that I really want to make sure everyone is aware of. Our attendance is something that we also have in our conversations. We have to keep looking at our attendance. We want to improve our attendance. Our overall goal as a district is 95%. That's something that I've you know, started sharing right when I walked into the door. We do have a few percentage points to go there, but we are wanting to continue to improve our attendance here in our school district because we all know that absence of students being in school every day, it does hurt overall academic achievement. We have academic outcomes in math, literacy, benchmarks, grades, third grade reading proficiency, GPA, and advanced opportunities. And all these conversations you've already kind of heard about a little bit today. We are, of course, having some exit surveys. And naturally, we're looking at our staff attrition and staff attrition rates, I should say. We, of course, have a diversity report that we have to have every year as well. And, of course, we are looking at our quarterly budget as an ongoing development conversation. One of the things that I've stated since I've been here, you know, yes, we were able to balance the budget last year, and that happened. But this is a year-over-year conversation. And so once you balance a negative $10 million deficit and you get to a balanced budget and without any support from the state, because this is a funding crisis, it's not just all on the school district of Beloit and our community through referendum work. We have to understand that there's another deficit coming, right? And so then you do it again. Now you got another $10 million to look at. And over the past 16 months, the school district of Beloit has cut over roughly $16+ million in our budget. And that's a huge Herculean effort. And again, I know that there's more work to be done yet. But at some point, we also have to say this is what we need in order to educate kids. It goes back to some of the comments that were made earlier. And it's a hard decision. It's hard things that we have to make decisions on in the school district. But again, that does not come with, you know, a lot of sleep at night, especially when you're talking about educating all of our students. And so overall, we have our district report card, and I'll just share here with you that naturally we have 5 years worth of data here, and it shows you that, you know, our next year goal that what we're trying to reach. Naturally, within our strategic plan, we want to be at that 58 number, which will give us the meets state expectation conversation. You know, with that being stated, yes, we do have a ways to go, and yes, we have made some incremental changes and some incremental growth. But part of our report card is very important in the conversation of why we went to the grade band restructuring. I think sometimes amongst all the things that we had to accomplish this year, changing our grade bands back to that K5, 6, 8, 9, 12 option allowed us to really capitalize on our state report card and being able to capture growth 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. Now, speaking to a teaching and learning, ex-teaching and learning guy, these conversations are very important to me because if you're not able to capture growth 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, it's kind of hard to get that multiplier that you will get being a high Title I school district. And so when we were 10 years in the K-3 system, unfortunately, when students went off to the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, we weren't able to track that growth opportunity. Now going back to the K-5 opportunity, we will be able to, in my humble opinion, be able to capture that growth because instead of a kid being moved to a different middle school in the 3rd grade, 4 different middle schools at a time, now they just go right down the hall, right? And we'll be able to capture growth from one year to the next, and we'll get that multiplier that I believe we weren't able to see in previous years. A very important concept that the school district of Beloit was not able to capture in that K-3 system. And again, that's not placing any blame on anyone. I always state that. But now that we're back in the K-5 setting, we'll be able to capture that growth at least there with that multiplier. Of course, there's growth that we still got to see in middle school, and of course, there's the growth on ACT and all those other indicators in high school. But again, we do have 6 elementary schools, and so capturing that biggest growth in elementary is a lot of times how districts are able to maintain their report card score or see changes in their report card score. Our enrollment history is very clear here. Over the many years, we've had to go up and down, and one could argue, you know, with the many changes that we've had to see, when I arrived here, we've actually have panned out around 5,000 or so students. And our goal is, again, to keep it above 5,000. Naturally, that'll help us in our overall conversation. But please understand that as we look at enrollment, the 3rd year falls off. Your lowest year, well, the 3rd year of your how can I explain this? Every 3 years, one of your years falls off. So your average changes. And so, unfortunately, one of our highest years in 2021, right before the pandemic, after the pandemic, will fall off of our report card next year, and then we will have another rolling average of roughly 5,000 or so students. And so we are forward planning in that thought. I know a lot of times this is data that people don't talk about, but internally we talk about where we're going as it pertains to our enrollment. Climate and culture data. In the attendance conversation, one of the things that we've done here is, when I got here, we really wanted to, address the elephant in the room is, we really want to see all of our schools over that 95% number. And as you can tell, we've had some fluctuations in that conversation. Every year is different, but I can tell you that we are, if you just look at the data side by side, you can see that we're making some necessary incremental changes in this conversation. My hopes is, again, that each year we get a little better and a little better, and that these 80s and high 80s, I should say, turn to, low 90s, and then, of course, we keep moving up in that conversation. This is a very hard thing to impact, I will say that, but it is something that we are addressing here in the school district. Attendance rates, of course, in the secondary schools are as follows as well. Of course, we see some of the changes that has happened. We did move to 2 middle schools this year, and naturally you see the attendance rates here. Behavioral data, we've had of course conversations. There's a policy yet that we have to of course address in this conversation as well. But overall, our overall offenses are down for the 2023 as of September. We did a snapshot there. Yes,
Dr. Garrison, is this September 22, is that the number of offenses during that month, or is this year to year?
Oh, this is year to year.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Oh, because if it was month, I think we'll have some other conversations about my leadership. And so this is year to year. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson, for the clarification. Behavioral district-wide, our suspension rates pretty much stayed the same over the course of this year. We would want to see this number continue to go down. It's not our goal to suspend more kids, but we would want to see that number go down. And so since I've been here, the suspension rates, since this administration have been working together, I should say, our suspension rates have pretty much remained the same. Academic outcomes, and I'll turn that back over to Mrs. Moratek. And I know I was talking fast, but I'm trying to capture some time from my team.
Appreciate that. I'll do the same, though. So when we adopted the American Reading Company materials, part of the purchase is it's called School Pace. It's an internal dashboard that allows us to look at progress. So our students are taking screener benchmarks, and we're able to look at 3 years now, end of the year. So remember, this is just foundational skills. So it's not all of literacy, because literacy is reading, writing, speaking, and comprehending, obviously. So in 3 years, we've gone from 24.1% to 37.2% to ending the year at 43.4% of our students in meeting the benchmark. We do this in 4th and 5th grade, but I specifically wanted to think about 3rd grade, because in our strategic plan, we were intentional about 3rd grade proficiencies because they are a predictor for future success and outcomes. So that's where we're at in foundational skills over the last 3 years. More work to do, obviously. I'm, on a mission for 100%. Reading is my passion as an educator. And so very grateful for the widespread commitment of this staff in this district, and the administrators and the teachers and the instructional coaches, because everyone is committed to improving reading outcomes in our district. And so more to come on that. The next assessment I pulled is MAP. These are done 3 times a year, and it looks at also the other pieces of literacy comprehension. And so what I pulled here was, this is a norm reference test. So all the kids that took MAP on that day are averaged out, and that's your norm. And you will see what our average norm was from fall to spring, so our kids are growing. And another highlight is the expected national norm growth was 10.5 growth points, but you'll see several of our schools outpace the national norm for growth, which is really important. Our focus is growth, and the reason why is because that's how you close gaps. Just like when you're running a race, you have to run faster if you start 10 feet behind the person that's on the starting line, right? You can't all run the same pace if one person's 10 feet behind. And so in order to catch up, you have to run faster, you have to grow faster. And so that's really been our focus as a district, is growth, because the academic outcomes will come in time when we're focused on growth. And we are starting to see growth in our internal benchmarks, which is really good. You'll see growth in internal benchmarks before you see a summative state assessment growth, but you want to see this growth first, and then hope that that'll be coming later. Anyone that studies research on assessment, that's a common belief that research often shows. So another piece that we could look at is based on our strategic plan is addressing disproportionality. We've been doing that quite a bit. So when you look at the average RIT scores for some of our groupings of students, you'll see that we're beginning to close gaps. Did you have a question?
Just real quick.
Sure, no problem.
What's RIT? Right.
Oh, yeah, great question. It stands for Roush Unit. R's from Roush, IT's from Unit. I'm assuming that's the statistician that made up what RIT is.
From Germany?
Possibly, yes. And what it is basically just a way to measure academic outcomes and growth, and they are on a range. So this particular assessment might be from like a 0 to 300. The ACT, right, 0 to 35. The SAT has its own range, and so this is just on this particular assessment.
Okay, we're going to have to develop a language course for the board.
No problem. Just ask the questions, and then, I'm glad I knew Roush. I don't always know all the acronyms myself. So that's what that is. So here you'll see when we're addressing disproportionality, we really want to look at in comparison to all students. Our special education, our disability identification students is still an area that we want to continue to work at closing educational gaps for. The other piece to look at this is the growth. Again, kind of that concept of running a race. and where our students are and where they're growing. We still have some areas of improvement with our African American Black students in their growth score, but overall, looking at across the RIT, you don't see some of those large disproportionate gaps that you often do or we have in the past. So I'm excited about that because we want in third grade reading all kids to be proficient regardless of their racial, ethnic, or any kind of disability identification. So that's that piece. Next slide. This is our forward data. Keep in mind, we don't have this year's data yet captured because we won't find that out until, it's usually embargoed until November. I'll be happy to have a report card conversation and presentation. I did that this year for the community and had people come just to explain. There's lots of nuances in the report card. Dr. Garrison alluded to some of it, but important to understand all of the things. I do think it's, on that slide, it's important to note that we are in kind of an alignment to how the state is growing. It's just there's a gap there between us and the state, and that's what we're working so hard to close. There was quite a bit of a gap in 2018 pre-COVID, if you note that as well. And so as we're addressing unfinished teaching and learning over those COVID years, we're starting to see gains. You will see on a national research when you look at this that really unfinished teaching and learning during COVID impacted mathematics more than literacy. And you'll see that in our scores as well. So I'm excited about this. This was presented in an update to the board a month or two ago about our work that we're doing in advanced learning. So working across all of our schools to have participation in the top 5% of their school. We changed that practice, and when we did that practice, we have more students participating, but I want you to keep in mind we didn't water down the expectation because they are still doing the same activities they were doing prior with different criteria. And again, addressing disproportionality there, significant with our ELL population, you'll see that. And then those other groupings, you can see the advancements. Okay, so let's talk about math. I pulled the common assessments because we have Eureka Math, and I wanted to pull this. This is the number percent of correct. Now keep in mind this is first year implementation. We're excited though to see across the middle schools this improvement. We had to be really responsive to the implementation this year. Very grateful for Dr. Gorud, our Director of Instructional Leadership in STEAM, because as they were implementing this, there were some concerns about the scope and sequence in our learning walks. So we worked hand in hand with the teachers to readdress that in lesson planning and so forth to make sure that we were finishing the year with the expected content, because you go slower in a year one implementation, but there were some concerns there. And so there's where we're at. Of course, we want to continue to improve 8th grade proficiency and algebra specifically, because we know that that's can be a gatekeeper for students for future math courses, and then also our expectations for ACT. This is addressing opportunity gaps across racial groupings. We still have some work to do there, but there's some goodness in that data as well. We don't see too many wildly disproportionate outcomes. There are a couple there that I highlighted in red, and this is always an ongoing piece because you want to think about equitable support systems for students, right? Giving students what they need. That's what equity is. And then this is our forward test. Again, this isn't this year, so I'm hoping when the data comes in November that it's better than what it is right now, because this is definitely a grow area for us.
Mr. Hankins?
Yes, I
sir.
just have a question. The benchmark data, I remember there was a term loosely used, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, about teaching to the test.
Yeah.
Is that something that still
So I love that.
Explain. Thank you.
Sure, I love that concept because we could be critical and say in a standardized test, we're going to look at all the test items and we're going to teach to the test, and then the kids have a very narrow education, right? But there's also test-taking strategies and skills. That's why they have prep courses for, right, the MCAT or for GRE or any type of assessment, ACT, that you take. And so there's balance there. These benchmarks are nice because they're the assessments that are going with the curriculum. So it should be telling the teachers and the students, this is exactly what the teaching and learning that is happening in this class. This is what we've been studying. And so here's the assessment that directly aligns to that instruction of those few weeks. And that's important. It's also important to identify common assessments. So across the schools, we've identified what are the common assessments that everyone is going to be taking so that we can have a bigger picture versus, this teacher is given this one, well, this one's not given this one, but given a different one, right? So we've done work to also identify common assessments, which is often a strategy that's utilized when building out coherent curriculum across the district.
Thank you.
You're welcome. ACT scores. So overall, there was a slight increase district-wide. We don't have when we did this, I didn't see on WiseDash the 23-24 compiled data. We have brought in pre-ACT into the light. We did that this last year for 9th and 10th grade, and then disaggregated the data with staff. We had not utilized pre-ACT before. We also brought it down to the 8th grade in hopes to give our students more practice and a head start to performing better on the ACT. Advanced placement. If you look in the green box in the lower corner, you'll see we've grown our enrollment of advanced placement courses over the last 3 years from 290 to 356 to 445. We're also working on having all students take the advanced placement assessment. Research has shown that when you give opt-out, students self-identify themselves and think that they're not good enough to take the test, have placement, but when you make a rule of everyone's going to take it and we'll fund it, you'll see more students passing advanced placement. And so this year, our overall, even though we had 445 kids, we had more students. We had the same average students pass it, but we had 66 more students get a placement of 3 or higher, which is a proficient score. And that's simply by saying you take the class, you take the assessment. And so the teaching and learning team met with the department this past week, and our department chairs were excited. I was hearing excited about that and thinking about how we continue that practice in the future. Thank you. Oh, yes, Ian. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just a quick question.
Yes.
With the fee for the AP exams, how is that being handled in the district?
It's being funded through the Teaching and Learning and Equity Department.
So none of our students pay for the AP exams?
No, we purchase them, just like we do for MAP or, any of the other assessments.
Perfect. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you.
I have another question.
Oh, sure.
So, looking at these numbers, I know these were last year numbers enrolled, right?
Mm-hmm.
These were from 22, 23, but, so what's the level that you need to make an AP class viable? Like, we got in here, 4 enrolled, 1 enrolled, 2 enrolled. So is that?
A lot of times, there's a criteria, but a lot of times too, it's student interest.
Okay.
And so just encouraging students to sign up. A real great example of that is we added the African American Advanced Placement course, and we have a lot of students enrolled in that, and it increased our Black, Latino, Latinx students participating in AP courses just by taking that on. And then you can see it on the right. Those are some other of the AP courses that we've added in hopes that there'll be more student interest in those. But that doesn't mean that we don't want to improve to the scores. For example, I'm interested in calculus, right, and how we improve the proficiencies and the number of students passing calculus AP. Just because we don't have a lot signing up for it doesn't mean we don't want a higher, percentage passing as well.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure that you answered my question. So the classes that we've got 1 or 2 or 4 children, is that even large enough to?
They run the courses, so it's not. They were enrolled in it, but it doesn't mean they were in the course by themselves. And I can go back and talk to the administration and see how they organize the courses.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll come back to you on that one.
Thank you.
Sure.
Next, we have our staff diversity report per policy 511. We strive to continually work and have staff that best reflects the racial and cultural diversity of our community and our student body. You can see the last 5 years of data corresponding to employees of the district or demographic composition and what percentage of all of our staffing they belong to. So you can see most recently, we increased in 23-24 the total number of minority staff to 199, representing 26.96%, a small gain over last year. But again, it's a momentum towards ensuring that we are staffing equally qualified but representative staff to our positions here in the district. The slide is just the total number of minorities hired by the district on each of those years and the percentage of the overall staff numbers that they represent. And again, you can see that gradual increase over the years. The next slide is our turnover rates, and this is based on a June 30th, so July 1st through June 30th timeframe. And for 23-24, when we closed out the number of resignations or separations that we had up to that date, we had a total of 86 of our 738 total staff members for a turnover of 11.65%. Of course, any separations past that will be reflected in the 24-25 numbers because of how we run our school year from July 1st on. You can see that last year, possibly due to the reconfiguration, there was a larger number of employees that vacated our district for an 18.06 turnover rate percentage. It's hard to tell the other data because of COVID. Not really the certainty or accuracy of those numbers, but exactly how this was measured. So the last comparable would be the 2019-2020 school year, which had a 13.03% turnover, slightly in between the 22-23 and 23-24 turnover rate.
I think
Yes, sir.
Sorry. I'm sorry. You had a question? Go ahead.
Mrs. Almendares, you may not know, but I'd like to have this information. Do we know how many years of service we lost in 23-24 and 22-23? Actual years of service of experience that we lost in those 2 years?
Not off the top of my head, but it's definitely data I can compile for you, gladly so.
Okay, and maybe by school? Do you have it by school too?
We can filter the data in a number of ways. So if you don't mind just sending me an email to follow up on your request, and I will compile that for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sure. So, I'm looking at the turnover rates here in the school district, and again, I know there's been conversations around cuts and making more cuts. But again, from 844 total staff, we're almost over 100 plus staff, and again, less than 16 months that we've had to, of course, over 100 plus, I should say, that we've had to separate with here in our school district. And again, these amount of cuts so fast does take its toll on our school district somehow. And I know there's more work to be done, but again, we put this slide in here intentionally because we want people to understand that our staffing is very important to us, but our numbers of our separations is due to a very, very different things, both from having cuts due to our budgets and, of course, cuts due to not just bringing people back. And so this is a very tough conversation to have as it pertains to when people believe that we may not be making cuts. But this is the data that we have to show to the entire school community that we are making cuts. But when you start saying 150 plus, 200 plus staff not being in your district anymore, it will have some type of impact. And so our hopes is that we will be able to maintain our student academic achievement, But these are some of the struggles that we have right now in our school district.
My last slide has to, I'm sorry, was your question?
Yes, Ms. Almendarez, I want to go back to your staff diversity report.
Yes, sir.
And forgive me if I don't see it on there, and I understand that the staff should mirror the population of the said school. Is that addressed in there? I mean, what percentage of our student population is X, Y, and Z?
Not necessarily in this slide. I do have that data. Be more than happy to share with the board the entirety of the diversity report, and we can even include it if that's what you'd wish, we can even include that for a future.
Yeah, I think it's important that we talk about mirroring, and I want to make sure that we are kind of mirroring or trying to, I don't know what the other side of the mirror looks like. Thank you.
Absolutely. I do, off the top of my head, I would say that we're almost at a, three-way pie of 33, 33, 33, white, Hispanic, Black, somewhere around there. So looking at the 29%, we still have some work to do. Absolutely. Lastly, we have the staff exit survey data, which we don't have available for tonight's board meeting. It will be prepared by the August 6th board meeting, and it will be comprised of the summary of the exit surveys that were conducted in person. In years past, the district, as I mentioned in a different slide earlier, had used a third-party vendor to provide those services. We since changed to School Perceptions, and they did not offer the exit surveys as part of their services. And so we decided, given the climate and the culture that we want to focus on increasing in the district, it would be beneficial for us to have those sit-down conversations with individuals, entirely voluntary, but we did have a good participation where they could be very candid and we can have an open exchange of why they're leaving, what we could have done better to retain them, and what advice they give the district moving forward. So there was a lot of great feedback that was provided, some great opportunities for growth, of course, but also some accolades as well. And again, that summary is going to be available by the August 6th board meeting.
Ms. Almendarez, just out of curiosity, now that you are doing these in person, how long does the average exit interview take?
That is a good question. I have had some that have Zoomed through it. We make it open-ended, so we don't have like a list of 10 questions. We basically want to focus on what prompted your initiative to leave the district, what we could have done better to retain you, and again, what are some recommendations that you have for the district moving forward so that we're able to attract and retain talent such as yours. Based on that, they provide the feedback that they feel best aligned with those questions. Some, like I said, they're pretty brief. I would say the longest was probably about a good 45-minute, where I sought some clarifying questions and they provided some additional input. There was one that we continued on a separate day because we ran out of time for our session and there was still more that person wanted to share, so we scheduled a follow-up meeting the next day. Very productive.
There we go. Speaking to the budget updates, we've talked about some of these already this evening, and probably a lot of these aren't surprising, but operational referendum questions are difficult to pass, as the district has experienced over the past 2 years. Hopefully we'll get to the point where the public is willing to make such investment to support public education further, but obviously they've got concerns that need addressing first. Again, talking about 23-24 school year, when we compiled this presentation, I had greater reliability, greater instinct that might tell me that we would end the year with a modest surplus. We did need to book a very sizable health insurance expenditure today. That will somewhat put that into question, but we're still working through those numbers, and we'll see how things shake out here at the end of the year, or as we close out the end of the year. We've talked about continuously improving our monthly financial reporting to the school board, and again, seeking to make that transparently available to the general public as well and going forward. One of the things that Ms. Elwood and I are somewhat excited about is we've seen some school and department level dashboards being utilized in other districts that are Google-based, so essentially free to us to build and to adopt. We're eager and interested in developing and deploying that here in the 24-25 school year for schools and departments. And really the next step then, once we've successfully done that for those buildings and departments, will be to make that available publicly as well, and perhaps somehow get that linked to our website. So some work to come in those regards.
Sorry. That concludes our presentation. Thank you, board, for the questions as we, went through the strategic plan. We will be doing another strategic plan on an annual basis. So next time you hear from us will be again next year, preferably in June, and we'll give you another update on our strategic plan. Again, the only reason why I was off cycle this time was because of the time frame in which I arrived. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Garrison and the cabinet members. We appreciate all your hard work and effort and keeping us informed. That brings us, any last questions before I move on? Okay, that brings us to item 5A, ad hoc committee recommendations. Mr. Anderson, chairperson of the Business and Operations Finance Committee.
Sure, I'll set the stage for this. So I think, first of all, we heard some people talk tonight about timeline and budgets, and all that's very true. And so the goal here is to, help flesh out some of those ideas and have that conversation. But I want to point out that, I'll speak for myself, a lot of respect and confidence in Mr. Chady's work and his staff, and that's not, the establishment of this isn't a function of work that's not being done. What it is, let's gather the thoughts and recommendations from a different set of eyes, right, that aren't inside the district on a daily basis. And I think, so the goal is to kind of gather that information and recommendations, and then, those can come to the board to act on or not. And but I think best case scenario, some different things are identified that can be implemented. Worst case scenario, it's still a good exercise, and we don't implement those. So in the haste and the timeline, I think we went through some painful meetings last week because, and I take full responsibility, kind of the protocol and the process of going about that. And I want to thank Board Member Schneider for keeping us on the up and up, and so I do appreciate that, to make sure we go through the right process. And even tonight, I think the names that are being put forward, I know Board Member Miller had put some names out that, just because she wasn't at that committee meeting, as many of you weren't. So I'm open to the discussion and, recommendations that the full board has. But we wanted to get the ball rolling and open conversation as far as I'm concerned. So that's where it's at.
Questions?
I don't have a question. I'd like to make an addition if that's agreeable. The individual wasn't available and couldn't get the phone number and all that sort of thing. So, is that okay?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. John Winkleman. He's a former board member. Michelle, do you have his email, or shall I just send it, or did I send it to you? I did send it to you. Phone number, and I sent his phone number and email. Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you.
And I know, and I'll point out with Board Member Miller, she did email as well saying, and she had some names out there, so I'll throw those out since she's not here to do that herself. For the good of the group, she had listed, and again, I don't know that she's reached out to these people or anything, so this isn't a commitment on their part by any means, but the names that she did put forth were Rick McGrath, Rick Barter, Beth Jacobson, and Heidi Eldred. She thought those would be, in her words, good people to ask. So it's unfortunate she's not here, but I think those were the names that she also would put forward for recommendation.
Ms. Levy?
Thank you. Just a couple questions. There are two groups listed on the sheet. One says confirmed and one says yet to be confirmed. Just seeking clarification on what it means that they're confirmed, because this is the first time the board is discussing the list.
At the committee meeting, it was my understanding that we wanted to reach out to these people just to see if there was interest in being on the committee. And so that's what I believe is what you see as confirmed. Not confirmed as in they will be on the committee, more so confirmed that they have interest in being on the committee.
Okay, so the yet to be confirmed, that list of 7 individuals, was the conversation at the committee meeting. We think these people would be great, but they have not expressed an interest or availability in being on the committee. Just trying to understand how these are listed.
Sure. At the current time, the yet to confirm are people who we have not yet to hear back from in the space of if they're interested in being on the committee that the board will decide on tonight.
Okay, so I think the last question in that vein, it looks like we have 11 people that are ready to go, that they have expressed interest, and the committee is willing to move them forward to the full board. Is what we're doing this evening saying yes to everyone who is in consideration? So the yet to be confirmed, the potential members that you just listed, and then if they are agreeable and available, they will automatically be added. Is that the process we're following this evening?
So I'll tell you the thought process, and again, I think we can recommend whoever we like, individuals, the group as a whole. We have all the options under the sun. I think we should consider the names brought forth by the committee. In addition, the additional name that Board Member Nichols brought up tonight, and the ones that Megan put forward, and any other ones that this committee or the full board would see fit as well. So I think it's, again, the idea is to get a well-rounded group of knowledgeable people and get their insights. And so it's broad, but I think that's the intention.
Okay, so just for clarification, it sounds like we will be confirming the 18 that are on the sheet, plus the names that were listed tonight, knowing that that number may shrink if those people are interest or availability. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay, thank you so much. And then my other question, so policy 186, the committee members are supposed to be given the function indicated in writing. I'm assuming that'll happen. There's a plan for that as soon as they're confirmed by the board this evening.
Yes.
Okay. And then in policy 186, rule 1, it speaks to several things, but one of them speaks to the committee will be notified of what resources will be provided by the board. And I'm just wondering if that was a conversation that was had at either of those committee meetings, what resources the board is committing to this committee, just so that we can make sure we're on the same page and they have everything that they need to do their work.
We did not discuss specific resources other than the policy says someone from administration is appointed as, so that's a resource, but I don't think I had identified any other further resources that would be needed.
So just one suggestion. It sounds like we have a great slate of people and we're ready to move forward with confirming that. If at that first meeting, we could just make sure that we're looking at policies 186 and 186 Rule 1 and making sure that we're compliant with that. Again, we want this to be a positive, productive experience for everyone that has stepped up and said, yep, we want to help out the district. So for example, if there are resources that are needed, I just want to make sure that we're holding up our end of the bargain and that we're providing those and everything is clearly communicated. So that's just a recommendation to cover in that first meeting. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Okay, under those yet to be confirmed, number 1, Kedron, she is not going to be available, so we can take her off that list at this point. And I would like to add Maria Aguilera to add a Hispanic person onto the committee to represent that population of the community.
Could you spell her last name, Board Member Schneider?
Aguilar.
Any others? Questions, comments?
I have just a question as far as time frame goes. The gentleman I proposed has yet to confirm or deny. What kind of time frame are you looking at, Brian?
So, it takes the time that it takes, I think, you're right, because you can't force people to participate. I think that we're gonna get commitments from people in their own time. We're gonna try to move fairly quickly because we understand time is of the essence. And I predict we're gonna end up with people that are gonna make some, not all, and they're gonna come and add value where and when they can. So I think, we'll pursue and the people that we do put forward, and it's really up to them how long it takes. But I think
No, I'm talking about whether you want them to be, when you want them confirmed. When do you want an answer from them on whether they want to be a part or not be a part?
so. The process tonight would have them appointed, and then
Right.
Again, as soon as possible. I don't want to put a date. I think we should all reach out and we'll try to
thank you.
organize that. Yeah. Again, as before, if we take any action on this tonight, just to be clear, if I want to go back to Board Member Miller's names. If those are ones that we want to include on the list too. So I just want to be specific and intentional if those are ones that are going to be included on there as well. And I take it as her putting those down. She's not here to say, yep, put them on the list, but she did take the time to put those names out there. So anyone that's making that motion, just to be clear that if we're including those names as well.
Mr. Anderson, I see you've got multiple motions for the recommended actions. Do you want these one at a time?
Yeah, the intention was we moved 3 different items to recommend to this board, hopefully to provide some clarity and so that people knew exactly what they're voting on. So I think those are the 3 motions brought to us. So I think it would make sense to do those 3 as presented.
So I'm looking under the agenda item detail. So the first one, move approval of the recommendation from the Business Operations and Finance Committee to dissolve the Ad hoc Finance Transparency Committee.
And that was an internal from that committee, so that one is not a recommended action for this board.
Okay.
So the first one would be,
Point of order. If the committee made that motion, wouldn't it have to come to the full board for full approval, since the board had sent that down to the committee?
I defer, and I see Board Member Schneider again saying, yep, that's exactly what we should do. So,
Yep. Well, let's err on the side of caution. And can I get a motion for the approval of the recommendation from the Business Operations and Finance Committee to dissolve the Ad hoc Finance Transparency Committee?
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion by Brian Nichols, seconded by Brian Anderson. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
But
Go ahead.
again, that was a consensus from the full board, and the Business Operations and Finance Committee was instructed to create that committee. So that is a board-requested action to be taken. I'm not sure that the Business Operation and Finance Committee can then say, no, we're not going to do what we've been directed by the full board. That's a question. I'm not sure where that stands, but I don't, because it was directed by the board, I think it needs to take place.
But if I'm not mistaken, the board is now instructing the dissolution of the Ad hoc Finance Transparency Committee. So do you believe that resolves the issue?
Well, it's the Business Operation and Finance that is then move that to the full board for discussion and a vote. But because that was a directive of the board, I'm not sure that the committee had the ability to go against the wishes or the direction of the full board.
So we do have the option to rescind that, and so we would just need to post it as such and then resolve that. So the two things are not linked in that we can pause and dissolve that once we post. That the option is to rescind the motion, and we can still move forward with this ad hoc committee.
Okay, thank you for that information.
Okay, I have a question. I think we may be talking semantics, but I'm not sure. For clarification, so we made the motion at the committee meeting to change the name from the Transparency Committee. So we voted that down, and then we voted the name of the committee to be the Ad hoc Finance Budget Committee. So now here we are at the full board, move approval of the recommendation. We just voted. We just made the motion and seconded the motion. Can we not just vote on that and we're done with that name?
So it sounds like there's two separate committees.
No,
There is,
no, that's-
if you could let me
okay,
finish.
sorry.
Thank you so
I
much. No problem. It sounds like, if I'm understanding you correctly, the board directed Business Operations and Finance to form an ad hoc finance transparency committee. Since that came from the board level, the board can rescind that directive. That would need to be handled separately. It doesn't sound like you can take that directive and change the name, but it's perfectly fine for the Business Operations and Finance Committee to construct an ad hoc finance budget committee that's going to be approved by the board. So that and everything that we've discussed with names, we can handle tonight. And then logistics of clearing up the transparency committee that was named as ad hoc, we can handle that separately. So this won't impede anything that we're trying to accomplish this evening.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to move approval of the recommendation of the Business Operations and Finance Committee to dissolve the Ad hoc Finance Transparency Committee. All in favor? Go ahead.
sorry, because we really didn't get to discussion it because we had questions. And so again, coming back to Board Member Levy's question, should we be taking action on it? I guess is I want to clarify if we're taking action on it.
It sounds like, and I would have to go back and check the minutes, if the board designated the creation of the Transparency Committee, and I don't have the exact name in front of me, then the board would need to rescind that motion.
Right.
That doesn't need to happen tonight. We can put a pin on that for a future agenda, and we can just clean up the logistics of that. There is a separate ad hoc finance budget committee that we're perfectly fine with getting that approved this evening with all of the names that we've just discussed. So what my recommendation is that the motion that has been seconded, we vote that down and we handle the dissolution of that at a future date, hopefully soon. And then we move forward with the ad hoc finance budget committee, hopefully with all of the names that have been laid out tonight, and I would rather have more names included, and if people decide they can't participate, then we can just subtract from that, but it has already been approved by the board. We don't have to come back. This ad hoc committee can move forward.
Any other discussion?
Okay, I don't want to beat this to death, but I don't understand why we have to push the ad hoc finance committee, transparency committee name out into the future when we can deal with it tonight.
Because if you're going to rescind a motion, similarly to the IHO that we'll discuss, you have to notice that the board is considering rescinding a decision that it already made. And that is not included on this evening's agenda. But we don't want that to impede what is happening tonight.
Any other discussion on this? Okay. All in favor of moving this, approval of this, move approval of the recommendation of the Business Operations and Finance Committee to dissolve the Ad hoc Finance Transparency Committee. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Oppose?
Nay.
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 I didn't vote, I'm sorry. Aye.
Motion carries with 3 ayes. Move approval of, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I was an aye, so we are at a standstill. 3 ayes, 3 nays.
Then it fails.
Motion fails. Move approval of the recommendation to form an ad hoc committee entitled Ad hoc Finance Budget Committee.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Brian Nichols, seconded by Tom Hankins. Any discussion?
I just want to make sure that we have the full list of all the names that were discussed this evening, so we don't have to bring that back to the full board.
Mr. Anderson, do we have the full list?
I do. So it's going to be the names listed, that's listed in the board items. And then we also have the 3 names put forth by, 4 names rather, by Board Member Miller, which is Rick McGrath, Rick Barter, Beth Jacobson, Heidi Eldred. And then in addition, we had John Winkleman and Maria Aguilar.
Any other discussion? Mr. Hankins?
Well, just looking through recommended action, that's the last line. Move approval of the recommended list of names. I don't know if we're being redundant.
Just a question, is there a reason we can't vote to form the committee? These are the list, and then the run of the committee, we can't just handle that in one motion? Is there a reason that we want it separated out?
That was my question originally, but this is what we've got.
Now, that doesn't mean someone couldn't make a motion to do all those things, Board Member Levy, and I'd be perfectly fine with that as well.
All right, so here we go. I make a motion to amend the main motion on the floor.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're amending, did you say?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Sorry.
To add to the creation of the ad hoc committee entitled Ad hoc Finance Business Committee with the list of names as discussed with additions. and that the committee will dissolve on or before December 31st, 2024. Board Member Anderson, did that cover all of the proposed motions that you recommended?
There's just one other one that chart gives the committee its charge, which would be the next one listed on the,
And that I'm fine with omitting from the motion, because I think the understanding is that we're going to follow policy and that all of that is outlined in the policy.
very good.
And just, Ms. Levy, you said ad hoc finance business meeting,
Ad hoc Finance Budget Committee.
Thank you.
Yep, with all of the names included as amended, and to be dissolved on or before December 31st, 2024. And I think it goes without saying that this committee will follow stated policy.
Ms. Shope, when you have a chance, can you please read back the motion to us? Make certain we've got it right.
Okay, this is what I think I have, was that Levy moved to amend the original motion approving the recommendation to form an ad hoc committee entitled Ad hoc Finance Budget Committee with the list of names provided tonight and those added at the meeting, and for the ad hoc committee to dissolve on or before December 31st, 2024. Is that accurate?
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
The part of the move approval of the recommendation to charge the ad hoc committee, finance budget committee to come back to the business. So we're eliminating that whole charge?
No, because that's included in policy. So
Well,
my
not necessarily.
assumption is that we're going to follow policy, and all of those things are outlined.
I don't want to see that removed. If we're going to vote on it separately, that's fine, but I don't want to see it. It wasn't mentioned. I think
Because
it's-
the understanding is that the ad hoc committee is going to follow policy, and the things that you just read are outlined in the policy. So they're not being removed, it's just the assumption that we'll follow policy.
I don't assume anything, so I'd prefer to keep it in.
Mr. Hankins, would you be comfortable in, after we vote on this one, making that motion just to cover all bases?
Yes, I would be. I'd like to keep it in as a separate one then.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion that was amended by Ms. Levy. Was there a second on that one?
Mr. Hankins.
Mr. Hankins, thank you. Any other discussion on this? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries.
And just for clarification, that's an amendment to the motion.
Correct.
We still need to go back to the main motion, and it sounds like Board Member Hankins would like to amend that now new main motion again.
Okay, so we've got the original motion of moving approval of the recommendation to form an ad hoc committee entitled Ad hoc Finance Budget Committee. Mr. Hankins, would you like to make an amendment to add the other verbiage?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to add, the amendment of move approval of the recommendation to charge the ad hoc finance budget committee to come back to the business operations and finance committee based on the research and make recommendations on possible ways to balance the budget, which includes impacts on students and the effect on the district.
Second.
Okay, the motion amended. Any discussion?
Just a quick question. Since we're specifying that line from policy, would you like to specify the other lines of policy, or is the assumption fall back to we will follow the policy?
I think it was laid out like this, Ms. Levy, because this is what they did during their committee meeting. Is that correct, Mr. Anderson? Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Any
Could I
opposed?
please get clarification of the second on that amendment? Thank you.
Brian Nichols. Motion carries. I'm sorry, amendment. Mr. Anderson, was there anything else on this item?
I don't believe so.
Thank you. That brings us to,
Board President Johnson, so we still need to vote on the main motion because we just voted to amend it for the second time.
thank you. Any discussion on the main motion? Michelle, do you remember who? Thank you. So we've got the main motion, motioned by Brian Nichols, seconded by Tom Hankins. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. That brings us to item 5B. We have, we flip-flopped them. It was originally 4B, but then 4 and 5 switched spots. So in May, we had a discussion on the expulsion hearing officer, and I have brought this back to the board after reading through the school perceptions staff surveys. All Wisconsin public schools have a responsibility to ensure schools are safe places to learn. This entails a safe environment for students as well as school staff. The decision to expel a student must never be taken lightly. Neither should the safety of our schools. We discussed an independent expulsion hearing officer in May. Upon reading the school perception responses from our staff, I decided to bring this discussion before the board again. There are multiple references to behavior, discipline, and the interference these have on the learning environment. In May, the board decided to continue without an independent hearing officer with or without an attorney. It is possible for the board to have training sessions to eventually not need an attorney to be present for the expulsion hearings. While at the time, in May, it seemed like a good idea for a cost savings measure for the district, I have second considerations. With the responses from the staff, considering the severity of the district's current issues, it may be beneficial to return to the previous practice of having a professional, independent expulsion hearing officer do this work while we board members focus our efforts elsewhere. In the school district of Beloit, over many years, in terms of addressing behaviors, a culture of concealment, denial, and fear of retaliation has created environments that can become potentially unsafe, both emotionally and physically. If we truly care about the social emotional learning, we must teach and lead through our actions, beginning with listening and attending to the needs of our teachers and students so they have a safe place to teach and to learn. While returning to an independent expulsion hearing officer will have an immediate financial cost, I do believe in the long term, the financial burden that this is will prove to be an investment in our student and staff through retention. Behavior and discipline have been issues the board and administration continues to deal with. Returning to an expulsion hearing officer is not a panacea for all behavioral and disciplinary matters, but it is a step as we move forward in providing support, security, and well-being to our classrooms. Ultimately, the board still decides and has the final say in the expulsion decisions, and students still retain their right to an education. Mr. Nichols?
I move to rescind the approval of the Board of Education continuing its current practice to hear the expulsion hearings from July 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025, with whether or not attorneys are involved to come at a later date once administration has had a chance to weigh in.
I second.
Motion by Brian Nichols, seconded by Tom Hankins. Any discussion?
Yes. One of the things that I want to bring to everybody's attention, I think I've been involved in 5, it's either 4 or 5 expulsions, and 3 of those were not fully board attended. So, in fact, 2 of those we only had 4 board members listening to the expulsion hearing. So I would, I think this is a wise decision and a wise move based on the feedback that we've all received in the results of the staff surveys and other discussions. So I'm in full support.
Ms. Levy, your hand is up.
It is. Thank you so much. So a couple of questions. One, I'm not sure, since the board still has the ultimate decision of how expulsions are handled, shifting to an IHO helps students or staff. And what I mean by that is it's going to cost us more money to have an IHO, and we'll have less information to make the decision that we're still legally obligated to make. And what I mean specifically by that, if there's an independent hearing office hearing the expulsion, and then they debrief us later, if we have a question that that individual didn't think to ask, then it goes unanswered. So my position is it will cost us more money. I think we're perfectly capable of running the expulsions without having an attorney sit in. I take exception to the comment that staff feel there's the fear of retaliation. I don't believe that any board member has or would reach out to a staff member concerning an expulsion that they may have been involved in, let alone retaliate against them. So I'm completely comfortable that retaliation is not occurring. So I'm not sure where or how that got started. But again, it will cost us more money, and we will have less information to make decisions that we are still legally obligated to make.
Mr. Schneider, your hand is up.
Yes, of all the expulsion hearings that we've heard, it's not like we have denied most of them and sent the students back to school. There has been one, and that was by far a majority vote in order to proceed in that fashion. So we have upheld the expulsion orders. Yes, we have modified them, and that is true, but we've also received a lot more information from administration because of the information that we have asked for since the board started hearing expulsions. I don't see how an independent hearing officer is going to do anything differently than the board would do, except as Board Member Levy has mentioned, that they may not ask the questions that we're looking for to better serve the individual student and to assure that that they receive the assistance they need in order to come back into the school system if that's appropriate. So, and we still would have to go back and still participate in that expulsion hearing by watching it and then reviewing it. So it's taking, we're spending more money. We're not getting any better results than what we have received at this point. And we have less information as to what's going on to support the students before they get to the expulsion, till they get to the point where they're up for expulsion.
Thank you. Mr. Schneider and Dr. Garrison, your hand is up.
Thank you, Board President Johnson. One of the things that I've tried to be very clear with is this process. And when I arrived here, again, there were a number of expulsions in the previous years. That's documented and duly noted. Since I've arrived, we've had 7 expulsion hearings. And of those 7 expulsion hearings, again, that's how many we've had since we've been here, total of the 16 months. Personally, I don't see the need of going back to an IHO knowing that we've had this amount. Again, if the amount was 30, 40, 50 that you had in 2014 or whatever it was, maybe there's a need for that. Our needs have changed here in the school district. And it's very important that we note that change has happened. And that's not a bad thing, okay? That is not a bad thing. There has not been any differences of suspension rates from when I arrived from one year to the next, as we saw in our data. And so from an administrative hearings perspective, we've had administrative hearings as well. And again, some of those have progressed to expulsion hearings, which that's what's going to happen in the school system. As I understand it, looking at the history, it was very cumbersome to go through those videos, looking at the time frame that you all had to spend in just doing that. The recordings, there was some cost that was associated with this as well. But there's cost now because we have our full transparency, right? We have our board lawyer a part of these conversations now. So I can see where that is a concern because we're still spending the money, right? We're still spending money with having a lawyer here. I believe one of the things that I brought to the table was the process to say, here's how we do these expulsion hearings. And so if we follow the process that has been vetted by our lawyers and that the administrators have also agreed to follow as well, we don't have to have lawyers here, period. We just follow the process that we've all been, most of us on the board have been a part of. And if there's any questions about them, of course I can answer that process, but it does not seem to be confusing to this board, the process that we follow. Now, again, do we need a lawyer to follow a process that's been already vetted by myself and the lawyers? Probably not at this point. However, it is a conversation that, the board, does have the right to have. And so it is of my opinion that we probably shouldn't go back to an IHO. However, if we do go back to an IHO, there's a new level of learning that we'll have to go back through all over again. Because many members on this board has not been a part of that process. And so that's something that we'll have to go back over to get back to a regular form of cadence when the expulsions do come to you all.
Thank you. Any other board members wishing to weigh in? Mr. Hankins?
Yeah, in reading through some of the comments that and I can't name them specifically, but I just felt there was a level of uncomfortability with coming through with referrals and passing them up. That there might be some type of retribution, not retribution, that's too strong of a word, but there was an inference that maybe perhaps they'd be looked down on as a building admin to pass forward these recommendations or referrals. And that's a general feeling that I got, a tenor of it, not all of them, obviously, but I think that was where the disconnect was. That's what I got out of it. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson, would you like to weigh in?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. And thank you, Dr. Garrison, and everyone for your comments. Yes, we have fewer expulsions this year, the previous year, and when we look compared to what we had pre-COVID, a change in the number of expulsions that we have. The hearings does not necessarily mean there's been a change in behaviors. My concern, especially reading our teachers' voices, is that behavior has become more difficult to manage, and we are losing valuable learning time. Again, the issue of behavior and discipline is multifaceted, multi-layered. This is one approach that we can take. We have, as board members, we have many different things we need to address. We need to work on getting a referendum to pass. We need to work on getting a referendum, helping our cabinet members get a referendum created, a robust one that will pass. And I believe that returning to having an independent hearing officer will save us in the long run. Yes, we have the upfront financial costs. Long term, there are the hidden costs that we don't even realize yet. Saving students, having families stay in the school district of Beloit, having better morale, having teachers speak positively about their experience in the school district of Beloit. These are costs that we can't even put dollar signs on. Ms. Levy?
Thank you so much. Just seeking some clarification on the position for an IHO. Is the position that teachers and administrators are afraid to put forward expulsions because the board will retaliate, and having an IHO is going to increase expulsions, decrease expulsions? I'm not making the connection with your saying we all want safe, secure spaces to send our children to learn. Absolutely. How does having an IHO versus the board hearing those expulsions impact that positively? That's the piece that I'm missing.
The retaliation is not necessarily at the teacher level. There is some from conversations I've heard, from reading through the school perceptions, from conversations I've had being stopped at Walmart. There is a level of concern and frustration from our constituents, from our teachers, from former teachers. Some of the comments I have heard are disheartening and heartbreaking, and I can hear and understand our educators' frustration when they are tasked to teach and educate our students, but are spending more time having to address issues of behavior, and when they themselves are fearful of what might happen to them physically. Parents, conversations with parents who are considering removing their students because they are fearful for their students' safety. The retaliation is not necessarily from the person being expelled, but from how administration might react to the teachers, how the building administration might react, and how the COLAC administration might react to the building administration. It's unfortunately a trickle-down fear, levels of fear of retaliation. We have to do something, folks. And again, this is one facet that we can do, and it's going to buy us time and freedom to focus on getting a referendum to pass. And hopefully in that referendum, we can say, hey, we need money to help these students that need psychological services. We need money to help students have better, more robust alternative education setting. We need money for these other items. And I believe moving in this manner, it shows our public we are taking this seriously.
Thank you for
Mr.
providing.
Schneider.
Almost done. Thank you for providing that additional context. So with what you just said, it sounds like teachers, administrators aren't fearful of the board retaliating against them.
No.
It almost sounds like teachers are fearful to put forth expulsions because there may be retaliation from the administration or CEC. Did I understand
Yes.
that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Same page. Having an IHO doesn't impact that positively or negatively. Just saying. And it doesn't buy us more time because we're either sitting in the meeting, hearing it, and getting all of that robust information so we can make the decision, or because I know all of us are going to watch those recordings, we're sitting at home watching the recordings, coming together to make those decisions with less information because it's no longer interactive, it's static. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Levy. When I was on the board in the past and we had the independent hearing officer, we were able to not have to spend time doing doodle polls and figure out when the board could convene with a quorum, and we could have all of the expulsion hearings for that month at a one-time setting. That did save us time. Mr. Schneider?
I agree that things definitely need to change. I mean, I think things are getting better, but we have a long ways to go with behavior. But I think the behaviors that you're talking about are things that need to be addressed within the buildings itself because they're not coming to the expulsion process. And whether it's the board hearing it or an independent hearing officer hearing it, it's all the steps before that that we need to focus on and address in order to change the behaviors of the students. Because it's all stuff that is happening before it gets to us. That's where that focus needs to be of the district, is how do we then look at what is happening, not the behaviors that are rising to the level of expulsion, but are the behaviors that are really interfering within the classrooms, within the district. And we need to figure out how we're going to specifically address those. And that doesn't make any difference as to whether the board hears it or the IHO hears it.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. You are correct. All of the behaviors are issues before they come to the board. They just are, all of them. And as board members, there's little we can do in the building ourselves. We can give our educators and our building admin peace of mind knowing if they need to expel a student, that that is an option for them. Since the implementation of the new form of having expulsion hearings in this manner, the admin and teachers have reached out to me, stopped me, communicated with me, I've had conversations with constituents. This new system is seen as a blockade for their ability to move forward with expulsions. Expulsions are difficult. They're sad. They're something none of us want to have to deal with. But we need to do something. Again, this is one step. We should probably also start looking deep at our behavior in terms of policy and doing policy audits to ensure that what is getting reported actually comes to the admin level, if that's where it needs to be, that what is getting reported is coded properly. There are many different aspects we need to be doing. We have a motion and a second. If there's no other discussion.
I do have a question.
Oh.
And again, one of the things that we have to be mindful of is, from survey's perspective, and everyone has a right to put whatever they want in a survey. However, a lot of the things that you may have read in the survey, some of the stuff is not even being reported to administration. And so it makes it a little hard at times for us to, take everything that's coming from a survey and say, this is what it is, or this is the bottom line facts. That's why when school board sessions will come in, they'll talk to you about, how they categorize some of the comments, and they'll tell us based off of their research how they, categorize, not only categorize the comments, but also how they have made the assumptions around some of the comments, because that's the data that they look at. I would just ask, any board member that, if you are getting reports or you're hearing things from, any constituents that you may have, that this information that it gets back to administration, so that we can go and address the concern, so we can make things better. That's the goal, right? I mean, it's not to say that we don't have any problems in our schools, but we have to address the concerns if we know that there's a concern. And so sometimes in this space, we don't even know who's writing the comments, who's saying the certain things. And if we take that for this is what it is, I think it's also not necessarily being fair to the entire space. Of course, I will move forward with any decision that the board will make. That's my job as district administrators. But I do want everyone to know that, again, when we're thinking about comments on surveys, they have validity, but sometimes we don't know that until we get the survey, right? And so that's just the space. So if board members do get information, I'd ask that information be shared back with administration so we can go and try to address the concern and make things better. That's the goal.
Yes, making things better absolutely is the goal. And Dr. Garrison, I thank you for your input and appreciate it. We've had this conversation before. If a specific issue comes up, board members know to contact you. They know to follow the chain of command. We know what to do. These are broad issues. If somebody doesn't want their name out there, they probably have that fear of retaliation that I'm talking about. This is what we need to solve. These are the things we need to fix in our district. If a specific individual says, hey, share my name with Dr. Garrison, I absolutely will. But until I have their permission, I want to protect where they stand because I want to protect them as an employee in our district because we can't afford to lose any more. There's a motion and a second.
Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Michelle?
Greg Schneider,
Nay.
Amy Levy, Brian Nichols,
Aye.
Brian Anderson,
Aye.
Tom Hankins,
Aye.
Tia Johnson.
Aye.
Motion carried 4-2.
That brings us to the next agenda item. The resolution authorizing a board expulsion officer to determine pupil expulsion. The resolution 24-25.01, expulsion of pupils, authorizing the board expulsion officer to determine pupil expulsion under Wisconsin State Statutes 120.13, Parent 1, Parent E, 1-4, effective September 3rd, 2024 to June 30th, 2025. Whereas this Board of Education hereby authorized the board expulsion officer to serve as a hearing agent appointed by the board. Whereas the board expulsion officer may expel a pupil from school whenever the board expulsion officer finds that pupil engaged in conduct that constitutes grounds for expulsion and is satisfied that the interest of the school district of Beloit demands the pupil's expulsion. Wisconsin State Statute 120.13, Parent 1, Parent E, 2A. Whereas no administrator may be designated to participate in an expulsion hearing, as such designation would present an intolerably high risk of unfairness in the decision-making process. Whereas within 30 days after the date on which the order is issued, the Board of Education shall review the expulsion order and shall, upon review, approve, reverse, or modify the order. The board expulsion officer shall be enforced while the Board of Education reviews the order. Whereas the expelled pupil, or if the pupil is a minor, the pupil's parent or guardian may appeal the Board of Education's decision to state superintendent. If the Board of Education's decision is appealed to the state superintendent within 60 days after the date on which the state superintendent receives the appeal, the state superintendent shall review the decision and shall, upon review, approve, reverse, or modify the decision. The decision of the Board of Education shall be enforced while the state superintendent reviews the decision. An appeal from the decision of the state superintendent may be taken within 30 days to the Circuit Court of Rock County. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Board of Education of the School District of Beloit, Rock County, Wisconsin, to authorize an expulsion officer to determine pupil expulsion under Wisconsin State Statutes 120.13, Parent 1, Parent E, 1-4, effective September 3rd, 2024 to June 30th, 2025. be it further resolved that this resolution shall remain in effect until June 30th, 2025.
I move approval of the resolution authorizing a board expulsion officer to determine pupil expulsion under Wisconsin State Statute 120.13, Parent 1, Parent E 1-4, effective September 3rd, 2024 to June 30th, 2025.
I second.
Motion to approve the resolution authorizing a board expulsion officer to determine pupil expulsion by Brian Nichols, seconded by Tom Hankins. Any discussion? Ms. Levy?
Thank you. Quick question. Under the second to the last whereof, I'm not comfortable with the board expulsion officer shall be in the board expulsion officer order shall be enforced while the Board of Education reviews the order. That I'm not comfortable with. And then a question, are we going to have interviews for an IHO? How will the IHO be designated if this motion or this resolution passes?
The board can discuss that. First, I wanted to before we even discuss how we're going to do that, I wanted to get this approved.
That's fine. So I would propose the removal, again, in the second to the last whereas, that last sentence. It's the board's responsibility to determine the outcome. And so if this passes, once the information is presented to the board, I don't want families to have to go back and forth if there's an adjustment or if the board decides not to accept the recommendation altogether. I think the families have been through enough transition. I think that they should wait and see what the final decision of the board is and move forward with one decision.
Mr. Hankins?
Well, I think what I'm hearing is eliminating that the enforcement wouldn't happen until after it is reviewed by the school board. I mean, it kind of loses the teeth of the SRO or the hearing officer if they can't make a judgment and then we review it. Is that what I'm hearing? That so their initial judgment is delayed until we ratify it?
I'm not sure what you're hearing, but what I'm saying is it's the decision of the board. I don't want families to have to potentially go through multiple transitions. If the IHO says this is the decision and then the board reviews it and that decision is modified, then the families get one plan and then they have to switch to a second plan. I would like to avoid that if this passes.
Mr. Schneider?
What is the purpose for not allowing administrators to be part of that meeting? You know, if the parent and the student are there and can testify on their side, and yet administrators from the buildings can't be in place to answer questions, that seems awfully one-sided and eliminates the ability of administration to provide information.
This is the state statute.
Then are we currently in violation because administrators are present during our expulsion hearings, so that can't be a state statute? Hold on.
Michelle, do you remember, Ms. Shope, do you remember whereas regarding the no administrator may be designated to participate in an expulsion hearing, such as designation would present an intolerably high risk of unfairness in the decision-making process?
I can't swear where that comes from, but I thought that was part of this statute, that the administrator isn't supposed to be a part of the expulsion hearing when you have the hearing officer, but I would have to double check that. Do you know?
I just know historically, it was the hearing officer sitting across the table from the administrative hearing officer, and the administrative hearing officer was the one presenting the information, on behalf of the administrator who was sitting present in the room with the student and the family. So I don't know if you get into that participate, if that.
Right, because the administrative hearing officer becomes the representative for the district with an IHO. So the administrative hearing officer is the person in the room representing administration.
Correct.
So that's where that's coming from. That's why that's being stated that way. Let me
jump in.
Yep.
Thank you both for your commentary on that space. As district administrator, I can tell you that it is part of my responsibility to be in rooms when we're talking about expelling a kid, because we've made the recommendation to expel a kid. And so I don't see where I wouldn't be in a room or in the conversation, because we making the recommendation to expel the kid. And so I was confused about that whereas. Of course, I was going to wait until we had this discussion naturally. But maybe there's some, like I said, maybe there was some other thing that I just don't know about, but I've never heard administration not being present in an expulsion hearing. Just because we are the ones that made the recommendation to go to expulsion.
Go ahead.
Turn the mic on.
Okay, when I was board president, we had, at first, when I got on the board, we had the superintendent in the room while we deliberated on whether or not to accept or reject or alter the recommendation from the hearing officer. Then when I became board president, I learned that you're not supposed to have the superintendent in the board during deliberations. I called the WASB and they confirmed that. They said that during deliberations, it's only the board. So I would say that if you are doing your own hearings, that's part of those deliberations, and the superintendent should not be in there. That's according to WASB, and your board president can double check that, but I did get that straight from them, and we stopped that practice right away. We stopped having the superintendent in the room. It was just us and the hearing officer. And then as far as the other concern about going back and forth, when an expulsion is recommended, that student is out of school then. He can't go back to school. And nothing is final until the board approves it. So a hearing officer would come to you at the beginning or the end of a board meeting in closed session, bring his recommendation for an expulsion that he heard, and he will have the paperwork there. He doesn't send it off until this board decides what to do. And then it's sent off. There's no back and forth of families, doing this and then having to go do that instead. It's done when the board says it's done. So I hope that clears up two things. The superintendent should not be in the room, and the hearing officer does not send anything final out until the board hears it. That's why he has to talk to you within 30 days, because he has only 30 days from the time of the hearing to get the information to them. I hope that helps.
I will say, since I've been here, we are not in the room during deliberations, when you're correct. I'm not in the room. My administrative team, IHO, is not, well, not IHO, my administrative team is not in the room when we do deliberations. And so that is true. But for the recommendation of the expulsion, of course, I'm in the room because we're the ones that's recommending the expulsion. So if we can keep that process in this conversation, I don't think we're in violation of anything. And that'll be where, that's what my administrative team will move forward with.
Thank you. Any other board, Greg Schneider?
I agree that, the practice has been no administration is here during deliberation, but during the fact-finding piece is the time that they should be part of that. But in the resolution, it says no administrator may be designated to participate in an expulsion hearing as such designation would present. So it's saying they can't be in the room at any point in time during that hearing. While I agree they should not be there during deliberation, but during the fact-finding part, at the beginning of that hearing is the time that administration needs to be there to present their report and what they're saying.
Strike that one line and put it back in.
Yep.
To your, Board Member Levy, to your wanting to remove that, the students, what was it you said? You wanted to remove the board expulsion officer order shall be enforced while the Board of Education reviews the order? Correct? Okay, it's in the state statute. The order of the hearing officer or panel shall be enforced while the school board reviews the order.
Thank you so much for that find. That just means that families could potentially be going back and forth if the order is modified. And I just wanted to focus on the decision we're going to make. As this resolution stands, it would be two attorneys talking to each other about the fate of our students without input from the administration during the hearing, and then we would get a recording, which is static. We would have less information and have to make the same decision for a higher cost. I don't have anything else new to say.
Any other board members? Brian Anderson, have you weighed in? Anything you'd like to add or questions?
The only thing I would say is I think the part that works with current process that I wouldn't necessarily want to see change is the superintendent's already not in the room for deliberation. I think everybody's agreed on that piece of it because it could do what this says, which is high risk of unfairness in the decision-making process, and that's where the decision's made, right? So I think that's solved with him not being in the room during the deliberation, but if I'm the IHO and I have questions during the hearing, I think administration would be the best people. They're already recommending expulsion. So there's no decision unless they decide to rescind their recommendation halfway through the hearing, which I guess anything's possible, but I haven't seen that yet. So I think administration's presence during the hearing would be beneficial.
Would Mr. Nichols, would you be willing to consider amending the whereas no administrator may be designated to participate in an expulsion hearing and insert the word deliberation? As such designation would present, so on?
I think before I answer that question, I guess I need to know, where did this language come from? Mrs. Shope? Mrs. Shope?
Yes.
Did this revision, because it's new, just typed,
I'm sorry?
was this information the same that was on the previous form that we used? way back when?
Yes.
Okay,
I found the statute.
okay.
It's different than what, there's more to it.
Did you just yell out
Would you, Ms. Charles, would you mind giving us the statute that you're, with the parents?
I just touched it and it went all the way down.
Yeah. That's why I like this form.
The administration does have additional information as pertains to our position. But if it's going to be changed, then everything's fine. If we're going to try to keep it in, then I think you all should definitely.
Right now, we're just considering adding the word deliberation in the whereas no administrator may be designated to participate in an expulsion hearing deliberation, such as, so on.
Do you mind if I ask Mrs. Beavers to read one of the most recent WSB from, I think it's from, what law firm was that? Boardman and Clark? Yeah, Boardman and Clark. Would you mind if that happens?
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay, you want me to read it, or, do you want to see it? Do you want to see it? If I move too far, it's gonna go, or I can't, here, whatever you like to read.
Can you just point it out on here?
It is, where do you see it?
This is state statute.
It says, it says no administrator may be designated to participate in an expulsion hearing if he or she was involved in the incident that led to the proceedings. Oh, that's different. I mean, if you want to just read it, I'll leave my phone with you for a second, but that is what it does.
Go ahead, Ms. Beavers.
Okay, I'm happy to share this. It's a legal comment from Boardman and Clark entitled Common Questions About the Student Expulsion Process. I'm reading from page 31, a question that says, this was December of 2021, who can attend expulsion hearings? Expulsion hearings are almost always closed to the public, and neither the student nor the student's family has a right to demand that the hearing be open. The student and family have a right to be represented at the hearing by counsel. Sometimes the student or family requests to have a non-legal representative or advocate present, for example, a friend or counselor. Boards are generally comfortable with that, provided the non-legal representative or advocate is not disruptive. The administration typically has the superintendent or the student's principal present, along with any administrators who will testify during the hearing. Other potential witnesses for either party should remain outside the hearing room and be allowed to enter only during their testimony. If the board is represented by an attorney, the attorney assists the board in running the proceedings. The attorney stays with the board during the hearing and the board deliberations.
Thank you, Ms. Beavers. So, Mr. Nichols, you accept adding the term deliberation after expulsion hearing?
Yes.
Mr. Hankins, you're okay with adding, okay. Ms. Schultz, do you see where we're adding deliberation?
I
I know which whereas you're putting it in, but where in the sentence are you putting it in?
That whereas will now read, no administrator may be designated to participate in an expulsion hearing deliberation.
Thank you.
Okay, oh, Ms. Levy, you've got your hand up?
My apologies, that was old. I'm all done.
Okay. So we've got a motion by Mr. Nichols, seconded by Mr. Hankins.
I would like a roll call vote, please.
And Ms. Schultz, when you're ready.
Tom Hankins,
Aye.
Brian Anderson,
Aye.
Brian Nichols,
Aye.
Amy Levy,
Nay.
Greg Schneider,
Nay.
Tia Johnson.
Aye.
Motion carried 4-2.
That brings us to item 6, the consent agenda. Typically, there is no separate discussion on the items unless a board member so requests, in which event the item or items will be removed from the general order of business in considering their normal sequence on the agenda. Would anyone like any items from the consent agenda removed? Can I get a motion for approval of the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Motion approval of the consent agenda by Amy Levy, seconded by Greg Schneider. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
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 That brings us to future board meeting dates. We've got a board workshop Tuesday, July 23rd at 5 p.m., a regular board meeting Tuesday, July 6th at 6 p.m., a policy committee meeting Wednesday, July 7th at 6 p.m. Oh, I'm
Correction.
sorry, August. Thank you.
August 7th, and that'd be,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and the time would be 5:30, not 6 o'clock.
Okay. August 7th, 5:30. Okay. Oops, sorry. Next item is human resources, employee recommendations. Are there any public session questions regarding the human resources recommendations?
I just have one recommendation moving forward. Under new employment, similar to how we do on the addendum rubric, it may make more sense for people who are following along. The salary ranges there are a little wide. If we put like years of experience or some type of indicator of the salary in the note section, just a suggestion.
Any other questions or comments on human resources recommendations? Oh, Mr. Hankins?
I just have a question, and forgive my ignorance, I guess. Interview panels, could I have some from HR, an interview panel, and who they consist of? Not personalities, but, and I see a wide variancy in from 9 down to 3. And under hiring administrator/supervisor, Emily Pels is on Benjamin's, but then it's 100%. I'm not quite sure what that means. This is on the, I think the new hires, I believe.
So the objective with that is to ensure that we have representation from the different groups. Now, during the summer, there is less availability of staff to meet the desired number of minority representation, simply because teachers are not in session. In July, we don't have elementary administrators in session. And so you will see less diversity or smaller pools of individuals that are in that hiring demographic.
So all the interview panel personnel is staff of the district?
For the most part, there are very few where we would have external stakeholders. It would depend on the level of the position, but we would not be identifying it. But most of the time, for like teachers, aides, et cetera, it's staff members.
Okay, thank you. And then over on the end, where Emily is listed under Benjamin's, but then it says 100% under the next four. I don't understand what that means.
That's a good question. If I can get back to you on what that exactly means, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Ms. Almendarez, I've got a question. So these, following on Mr. Hankins, the interview panels, these are determined by who determines who's on the interview panels?
The hiring manager. So a position, say at Converse, may be spearheaded by Ms. Malott, and she would identify who in her team or even another school will be a part of that committee, or that, I shouldn't call it committee, but that hiring process for her.
Okay, and that's so that we have representation and input from the employees who are affected by that hire?
Correct.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments? Are there any closed session questions for this item? Okay, can I get a motion then for,
I move approval of employee recommendation Exhibit A.
Second.
motion of approval of Exhibit A by Board Member Amy Levy, seconded by Board Member Greg Schneider. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. That brings us to the next agenda item. Executive session to go in to discuss closed session meeting minutes and superintendent evaluation. A motion may be made and a vote taken to convene the Board of Education into closed session pursuant to Section 19.85, Parent 1, Parent C of the Wisconsin State Statutes relative to considering performance evaluation data of the superintendent. Can I get a motion?
So
please?
moved.
Second.
Motion by Amy Levy, seconded by Brian Nichols. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
It's a roll
Pardon
call
me,
vote.
it's a roll
I'm
call.
sorry. I always forget that this late at night, don't I? Thank you.
Greg Schneider,
Aye.
Amy Levy,
Aye.
Brian Nichols,
Aye.
Brian Anderson,
Aye.
Tom Hankins,
Aye.
and Tia Johnson.
Aye, and the Board of Education may reconvene into public session in order to take any action, if necessary, on any items discussed in closed session. Thank you, everyone. Or
Can I say something while we're all here?
Sure.
Congratulations, Ryan.
We may convene, we will adjourn from closed session. Thank you.